The term Varangian emerges from the linguistic depths of medieval Scandinavia, carrying within its syllables the essence of a warrior merchant culture that would reshape the political landscape of Eastern Europe. The word derives from the Old Norse Varangi, itself rooted in varar, meaning pledges or oaths. This etymology reveals the fundamental nature of these men. They were oath-sworn companions bound by sacred vows of loyalty and mutual protection. Unlike the loose confederations of raiders that characterized much of Viking activity, Varangians operated within structured brotherhoods, where personal honour and collective obligation form the bedrock of their identity. The linguistic evolution of the term demonstrates its widespread adoption across medieval Europe. Byzantine Greek sources refer to them as baragoi, while Slavic chronicles use variations like variagi. The consistency of this terminology across diverse linguistic traditions underscores the distinct identity these warrior traders maintained throughout their centuries of activity. The Old Norse Varangi specifically denoted those who had sworn oaths within a trading company or military fellowship, distinguishing them from ordinary merchants or seasonal raiders. Archaeological evidence from the Swedish island of Gotland provides compelling testimony to the Varangian commercial networks that preceded their military expeditions. Gotlandic silver hoards, numbering in the hundreds, contain an extraordinary concentration of Islamic dirhams, Byzantine solidi, and Western European deniers. The Spillings hoard alone, discovered in 1999, contained over 14,000 silver coins and numerous silver objects weighing approximately 67 kilograms. The chronological distribution of these coins, spanning from the 8th to the 11th centuries, maps directly onto the period of Varangian expansion eastward along the river systems of what would become Russia. The geographic origins of the Varangians centre primarily on the Swedish territories of Uppland and Södermanland, regions that would later coalesce into the medieval Kingdom of Sweden. The Mälaren Valley, with its intricate network of waterways connecting to the Baltic Sea, served as the launching point for expeditions that would eventually reach Constantinople and Baghdad. Archaeological investigations at Birka, the premier trading centre of 9th and 10th century Sweden, reveal a cosmopolitan settlement with artefacts spanning from Greenland walrus ivory to Chinese silk, demonstrating the extensive reach of Swedish merchant networks. Birka's excavations have yielded particularly significant evidence of Eastern connections predating the traditional dates of Varangian expansion. Silk fragments bearing patterns consistent with Central Asian production techniques, glass beads matching those found in Volga-Bulgar territories, and silver arm rings of distinctly Slavic manufacture all point to established trade relationships extending deep into Eastern Europe by the early 9th century. The famous Birka warrior grave BJ 581, long assumed to contain a male warrior, was revealed through DNA analysis in 2017 to hold the remains of a woman, challenging traditional assumptions about Varangian military culture while confirming the sophisticated nature of their society. The socio-political conditions in 9th century Scandinavia created the perfect storm for eastward expansion. Population pressure in the fertile but limited agricultural lands of central Sweden coincided with the consolidation of royal power under emerging dynasties. The traditional egalitarian structure of Scandinavian society faced increasing strain as successful war leaders accumulated wealth and followers, creating a class of professional warriors who required constant opportunities for profit and glory to maintain their retinues. The fragmentation of the Carolingian Empire after Charlemagne's death in 814 disrupted established Western trade routes, forcing Scandinavian merchants to seek alternative pathways to the wealth of the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. The river systems of Eastern Europe, particularly the Volga and Dnieper routes, offered unprecedented access to these lucrative markets. Unlike the hazardous sea voyages required for Western expansion, the eastern rivers provided relatively safe passage for large expeditions carrying substantial trade goods. Swedish society of this period operated under a complex system of regional kingdoms and petty chieftains, with power concentrated among those who could command loyalty through gift-giving and successful military leadership. The archaeological record from sites like Gamla Uppsala reveals a society in transition, where traditional burial practices involving ship cremations and elaborate grave goods coexisted with emerging Christian influences. This cultural flexibility would prove essential for Varangian success in the diverse religious and ethnic landscape of Eastern Europe. The relationship between Varangians and their Western Viking counterparts reveals fundamental differences in motivation and methodology. While Norwegian and Danish Vikings primarily pursued raiding, territorial conquest and seasonal campaigns, the Swedish Varangians developed a more sophisticated approach, combining military prowess with commercial acumen. The Western Vikings' famous hit-and-run tactics, exemplified by raids on monasteries and coastal settlements, contrasted sharply with the Varangian strategy of establishing permanent trading posts and political alliances along their eastern routes. Varangian expeditions typically involved larger groups travelling together for extended periods, often establishing winter quarters in strategic locations along major rivers. The logistical requirements for such operations necessitated careful planning and substantial initial investment, distinguishing these ventures from the opportunistic raids characteristic of Western Viking activity. Archaeological evidence from sites along the Volga and Dnieper rivers reveals permanent Scandinavian settlements with sophisticated defensive works, storage facilities, and craft production areas. The technological innovations that enabled Varangian success included modifications to traditional Scandinavian shipbuilding techniques. While Western Vikings perfected the longship for coastal raiding and ocean voyages, Varangians developed shallow draft vessels optimized for river navigation. These ships, capable of being portaged between river systems, featured reinforced keels and flexible construction, allowing them to withstand the stresses of being dragged over land between waterways. The social structure of Varangian expeditions reflected their dual nature as warriors and merchants. Leadership typically rested with individuals who combined martial skill with commercial expertise, men capable of negotiating complex trade agreements while commanding respect from their armed followers. The famous Varangian leader Rurik, whose activities in the mid-9th century established the foundation for the Rurikid dynasty, exemplified this combination of military leadership and political acumen. Archaeological evidence from Staraya Ladoga, often considered the first major Varangian settlement in Eastern Europe, demonstrates the sophisticated nature of these early establishments. Founded around 753, the settlement shows clear Scandinavian architectural influences alongside Slavic and Finnic elements, suggesting a multicultural community organised around trade and craft production. The discovery of Scandinavian-style longhouses, specialised workshops for metalworking and bee production, and substantial quantities of imported goods confirms the site's role as a major commercial centre. The material culture of the Varangians, as revealed through archaeological investigation, demonstrates their adaptability and cultural synthesis. Weapon finds from Varangian context show a preference for high-quality Frankish swords, often bearing inscriptions like Ulfbert or Ingelri, combined with Scandinavian-style spearheads and axes. Personal ornaments frequently combine Scandinavian artistic motifs with Byzantine and Islamic influences, creating distinctive hybrid styles that mark the archaeological signature of Varangian presence. The economic foundations of Varangian expansion rested on the exploitation of natural resources abundant in northern territories but scarce in southern markets. Furs, particularly sable, ermine and fox pelts, commanded extraordinary prices in Byzantine and Islamic markets. Amber from Baltic shores, walrus ivory from Arctic expeditions, and slaves captured in raids or purchased from local populations formed the primary commodities of Varangian trade. The return journey brought Byzantine silk, Islamic silver, spices, and luxury manufactured goods back to Scandinavian markets. The transformation of scattered river systems into a coherent commercial highway represented one of medieval Europe's most ambitious logistical achievements. The route from the Varangians to the Greeks, as chronicled in the primary chronicle, evolved from existing waterways used by local populations into a sophisticated network capable of supporting large-scale expeditions carrying tons of merchandise across thousands of miles. The Dnieper River system formed the backbone of this route, its 400-mile length connecting the forests of the north with the steppes approaching the Black Sea. The northern terminus began at the Neva River, flowing from Lake Ladoga into the Gulf of Finland. Varangian expeditions would navigate upstream into Lake Ladoga, then continue south via the Volkhov River to reach Lake Ilmen. From this crucial junction, multiple routes diverged toward the Dnieper system. The primary path followed the Lovet River southward, requiring the first major portage at the watershed divide separating the Baltic and Black Sea drainage basins. Archaeological evidence from this portage area reveals worn trackways reinforced with timber corduroy roads, indicating the systematic development of infrastructure to support regular commercial traffic. The Dnieper proper began its role in the route system at Smolensk, where Varangian merchants consolidated their expeditions after completing the northern portages. The river's character changed dramatically along its course, beginning as a relatively narrow waterway meandering through dense forests before broadening into the mighty stream that approached the Black Sea rapids. Seasonal variations profoundly affected navigation, with spring floods providing maximum water depth but dangerous currents, while late summer offered calmer conditions but potentially insufficient depth for fully loaded vessels. Novgorod emerged as the northern anchor of the entire system, though its relationship to the waterway developed gradually over the 9th and 10th centuries. The settlement's strategic position at the convergence of multiple river routes made it an inevitable control point for expeditions heading south. Archaeological layers from this period reveal a cosmopolitan trading centre, where Scandinavian merchants established permanent quarters alongside Slavic, Finnic, and Baltic populations. The famous Novgorod birchbark documents, though dating primarily from later centuries, preserve references to commercial practices that clearly originated in the Varangian period. The city's defensive earthworks, constructed in multiple phases during the 10th century, demonstrate the growing importance of controlling access to the southern routes. Varangian influence in Novgorod manifested through the establishment of specialized quarters where Scandinavian merchants maintained warehouses, workshops, and residential compounds. Excavations in these areas have yielded distinctive Scandinavian-style buildings with central hearths, raised sleeping platforms, and storage cellars designed for preserving furs and other trade goods through the harsh northern winters. Smolensk occupied a crucial intermediate position where the western Dvina and Dnieper systems approached each other, requiring only a relatively short portage between major waterways. The settlement's location on elevated ground overlooking the Dnieper provided natural defensive advantages while offering excellent visibility for monitoring river traffic. Archaeological evidence indicates that Smolensk developed rapidly during the 9th century, transforming from a modest Slavic settlement into a major commercial centre under Varangian influence. The physical remains of Varangian presence in Smolensk include substantial earthen fortifications, evidence of specialised craft production, and numerous finds of Scandinavian origin artefacts. Weapon deposits found in the city's vicinity suggest that significant military forces were stationed there, likely to protect the valuable portage route and warehouse merchandise. The discovery of scales, weights, and silver fragments indicates that Smolensk served as a major point for evaluating and dividing trade goods, a function requiring trusted intermediaries and standardized measurement systems. Kiev represented the crown jewel of the entire route system, positioned where the Dnieper's navigable upper reaches met the dangerous but passable lower river leading to the Black Sea. The settlement's commanding position on bluffs overlooking the river provided both defensive advantages and symbolic authority over all traffic attempting to pass. Under Varangian control, Kiev evolved from a regional Slavic centre into the political and commercial capital of a vast territorial network extending from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The transformation of Kiev under Varangian leadership involved massive construction projects, including the expansion of existing fortifications and the creation of specialised commercial districts. Archaeological investigations have revealed evidence of planned urban development, with distinct areas designated for different crafts and commercial activities. The presence of substantial Scandinavian-style halls suggests that Varangian leaders maintained impressive residential compounds, befitting their status as rulers of this crucial commercial hub. The strategic importance of Kiev extended beyond its position on the Dnieper route. The city controlled access to several tributary rivers, including the Desna and Pripet, which provided connections to additional Slavic territories and alternative routes toward Western Europe. This network effect multiplied Kiev's value, making control of the city equivalent to dominating trade throughout much of Eastern Europe. The wealth generated by this position enabled Kiev's rulers to maintain substantial military forces and engage in the diplomatic relationships necessary for successful long-distance commerce. The establishment of tribute systems represented a crucial innovation in Varangian commercial strategy, transforming potentially hostile Slavic populations into reliable suppliers of trade goods and military support. Rather than simply raiding for slaves and portable wealth, Varangian leaders developed sophisticated arrangements that guaranteed regular deliveries of furs, honey, wax, and other valuable commodities. These systems required careful negotiation and the maintenance of personal relationships with local chieftains and tribal leaders. Archaeological evidence for these tribute relationships appears in the form of standardized weights and measures found throughout the route system, suggesting centralized control over commercial transactions. The discovery of sealed storage facilities at major settlements indicates that tribute goods were collected, processed, and warehoused before being incorporated into larger trading expeditions. The scale of these operations required substantial administrative capabilities, including record-keeping systems and trusted agents capable of managing complex multi-party agreements. The integration of Slavic populations into Varangian commercial networks involved more than simple extraction of tribute. Evidence suggests that local craftsmen were encouraged to produce goods specifically for export markets, leading to the development of specialized industries in different regions. Novgorod became renowned for its leather and textile production, while settlements along the upper Dnieper specialized in metalworking and jewelry manufacture. This economic specialization created interdependencies that strengthened the overall system, while providing local populations with incentives to maintain peaceful relationships with their Varangian overlords. Interaction with Slavic tribes required Varangian leaders to navigate complex political landscapes involving competing clans, shifting alliances, and diverse cultural practices. The success of figures like Oleg of Novgorod in establishing stable tributary relationships demonstrates sophisticated diplomatic skills extending far beyond military prowess. Archaeological evidence from Slavic settlements shows gradual adoption of Scandinavian-style material culture, including weapon types, jewelry designs, and architectural elements, suggesting cultural exchange rather than simple domination. The seasonal nature of river navigation fundamentally shaped Varangian commercial operations and the development of the route system. Spring expeditions took advantage of maximum water levels created by snowmelt and spring rains, allowing heavily loaded vessels to navigate shallow sections that became impassable later in the year. However, spring floods also created dangerous conditions, with swift currents, floating debris, and unpredictable water levels threatening expedition safety. Summer trading seasons offered the most favourable conditions for large-scale expeditions, with stable water levels and predictable weather patterns. Archaeological evidence suggests that major commercial expeditions typically departed from northern bases in late spring, spent the summer months travelling south and conducting business in Constantinople, then returned north before winter freeze-up made river navigation impossible. This annual cycle required careful coordination of activities across thousands of miles and numerous political jurisdictions. Winter months were utilised for preparation, maintenance and local trade activities. Varangian merchants established permanent winter quarters at strategic locations along the route, where they could repair equipment, negotiate with local suppliers, and prepare for the following year's expeditions. These winter settlements often evolved into permanent trading posts, creating the infrastructure necessary for the route's long-term success. The development of specialised river vessels represented a crucial technological achievement, enabling Varangian success on the eastern routes. Traditional Scandinavian shipbuilding techniques were modified to create vessels optimised for river navigation rather than open-sea voyaging. These boats featured shallow drafts allowing navigation in relatively shallow water, flexible construction enabling them to withstand the stresses of portage, and modular designs facilitating repairs using locally available materials. Archaeological remains of Varangian-era vessels, discovered at sites like Staraya Ladoga and preserved in favourable conditions, reveal sophisticated construction techniques adapted to the specific requirements of river trading. The vessels typically measured 40 to 60 feet in length, with beam-to-length ratios optimised for cargo capacity rather than speed. Reinforced keels and flexible planking allowed the boats to be dragged over land during portages without suffering structural damage. The cargo capacity of these vessels determined the economic viability of long-distance trading expeditions. A typical Varangian trading boat could carry approximately 15 to 20 tons of merchandise, representing enormous value in high-demand commodities like furs and silver. The ability to transport such quantities economically across the entire route system made possible the accumulation of wealth that funded further expansion and the establishment of permanent political control over key territories. Portage techniques developed by Varangian traders became increasingly sophisticated as the route system matured. The most challenging portages, such as the transfer between the Lovat and Dnieper watersheds, required the construction of permanent infrastructure, including reinforced trackways, storage facilities, and defensive positions. Archaeological evidence reveals the use of log rollers, rope and pulley systems, and specialised carts designed to transport both vessels and cargo across these difficult terrain features. The organisation of portage operations required substantial labour forces and careful coordination. Evidence suggests that Varangian expeditions employed local populations for portage work, creating additional economic opportunities for Slavic communities while reducing the manpower requirements for expedition members. These arrangements often involved payment in trade goods or silver, further integrating local populations into the commercial network. The most dangerous section of the entire route system lay in the Dnieper Rapids, a series of 7 major cataracts where the river dropped approximately 130 feet over a distance of 40 miles. Constantine Porphyrogenitus provides detailed descriptions of these rapids in his De Administrando Imperio, recording both their Slavic and Norse names, while describing the specific techniques used to navigate each obstacle. The rapids required different approaches depending on water levels and specific conditions, ranging from careful navigation through narrow channels to complete portage around the most dangerous sections. Archaeological evidence from the rapids region includes numerous finds of weapons, tools, and personal ornaments lost during the treacherous passage. The concentration of high-value artifacts in this area testifies to both the wealth of the expeditions attempting the passage and the genuine dangers they faced. Defensive positions constructed on islands and promontories within the rapids zone indicate that Varangian expeditions also faced human threats, likely from Pecheneg raiders who recognized the vulnerability of heavily loaded trading expeditions negotiating the difficult waters. The successful navigation of the Dnieper Rapids marked only the beginning of the final and most crucial phase of the Varangian journey south. Beyond the cataracts lay the broad expanse of the lower Dnieper, where the river widened into a series of shallow lakes and marshy deltas before reaching the Black Sea. This transition zone, known to the Byzantines as the Borysthenes Mouth, presented its own challenges as expeditions faced the constant threat of Pecheneg raiders while navigating increasingly complex waterways that shifted seasonally with flood patterns and sediment deposits. The emergence of the primary chronicles account of the calling of the Varangians in 862 represents one of medieval Europe's most contentious historical narratives, blending verifiable political events with legendary elements that serve the ideological needs of later Kievan rulers. The chronicle, compiled in Kiev during the early 12th century by monks seeking to establish the legitimacy of the Rurikid dynasty, presents a remarkably convenient origin story, wherein Slavic and Finnic tribes voluntarily invited Scandinavian rulers to impose order on their chaotic territories. According to the chronicle's account, the Slavic tribes of the Ilmen region, the Krivichi, and various Finnic groups including the Chud and Vez had previously expelled Varangian tribute collectors, but subsequently found themselves unable to maintain internal peace. The text records their supposed declaration: "Our land is great and rich, but there is no order in it. Come to rule and reign over us." This narrative framework, while politically useful for legitimizing foreign rule, bears suspicious resemblance to similar foundation myths found throughout medieval European chronicles. Modern archaeological evidence provides a more complex picture of Varangian settlement patterns that challenges the chronicle's neat narrative of invited rulership. Excavations at Staraya Ladoga reveal continuous Scandinavian presence from approximately 750, more than a century before the supposed calling. The material culture from these early levels shows not the artifacts of invited administrators but the equipment of warrior merchants, weapons caches, silver hoards, and the specialized tools of long-distance traders. The gradual evolution of the settlement's defensive work suggests organic growth, rather than the sudden establishment of an administrative centre. The chronicle's dating of Rurik's arrival to 862 coincides suspiciously with other significant events in Varangian expansion, including the first recorded Rus attack on Constantinople in 860. This chronological clustering suggests that later chroniclers may have artificially synchronized events to create a more coherent narrative. Contemporary Byzantine sources, particularly the Vita Basilii and the Chronicles of Theophanes Continuatus, make no mention of any calling but instead describe the Rus as aggressive raiders who appeared suddenly in the Black Sea region during the mid-9th century. The figure of Rurik himself presents historians with a fascinating puzzle of identity and historical verification. The primary chronicle describes him as one of 3 brothers who divided the northern territories among themselves, with Rurik taking Novgorod, Cineas controlling Beluzero, and Truva ruling Izborsk. However, the names Cineas and Truva bear striking resemblance to Old Norse terms Sina Hus and Thru Varing, suggesting these may represent misunderstood references to Rurik's household and retinue rather than actual siblings. Archaeological investigation of Rurik's supposed capital at Novgorod reveals significant chronological problems with the traditional narrative. The earliest levels of the Novgorod settlement date to the mid-10th century, nearly a century after Rurik's supposed establishment there. However, the nearby Rurikovo Gorodische, located at the confluence of the Volkhov and Mista rivers, shows evidence of high-status occupation beginning in the mid-9th century. This fortified settlement, featuring Scandinavian-style longhouses and substantial defensive earthworks, likely represents the actual seat of early Varangian power in the region. The material culture from Rurikovo Gorodische demonstrates the sophisticated nature of early Varangian administration, Finds include Byzantine-style seals, standardized weights conforming to Islamic measurement systems, and high-quality weapons bearing Frankish and Scandinavian characteristics. The presence of specialized craft workshops, particularly those producing glass beads and metalwork for export, indicates that this settlement served as more than a simple military stronghold. Instead, it functioned as an integrated commercial and administrative centre, controlling access to the northern river routes. The legendary establishment of the Rurikid dynasty gains credibility when examined through the lens of Scandinavian political practices, rather than the chronicle's romanticised narrative. Varangian leadership typically emerged through a combination of military success, commercial acumen, and the ability to maintain loyalty among diverse followers. Rurik's historical significance lies not in any supposed invitation by local tribes, but in his successful consolidation of control over the crucial junction where multiple river systems converged. DNA analysis of remains from high-status burials in the Novgorod region has provided intriguing evidence for Scandinavian elite presence during the 9th and 10th centuries. Several individuals show genetic markers consistent with Swedish populations, while their grave goods demonstrate the wealth and status associated with successful long-distance trading. These findings support the presence of a Scandinavian ruling class, while avoiding the problematic aspects of the chronicle's foundation narrative. The political structure established by Rurik and his successors represented a synthesis of Scandinavian military organisation, with existing Slavic and Finnic administrative practices. Archaeological evidence from fortified settlements throughout the region shows the development of hierarchical settlement patterns, with major centres like Rurikovo Gorodishche controlling networks of smaller trading posts and tribute collection points. This system required sophisticated communication networks and trusted administrators capable of managing complex relationships with diverse local populations. Staraya Ladoga provides the most compelling archaeological evidence for early Varangian settlement and the gradual development of Rus political organisation. Founded around 753 at the confluence of the Volkhov River and Ladozhka Creek, the settlement occupied a strategic position controlling access between Lake Ladoga and the river routes leading south toward the Dnieper system. The site's location, approximately 8 miles upstream from Lake Ladoga, provided protection from seaborne raiders while remaining accessible to river traffic. The earliest occupation layers at Staraya Ladoga reveal a multicultural community where Scandinavian settlers lived alongside Slavic and Finnic populations. Scandinavian-style longhouses, characterized by central hearths and raised sleeping platforms, appear alongside Slavic semi-subterranean dwellings and specialized workshops for metalworking, bead production and leather processing. This architectural diversity suggests a community organized around commercial activities rather than ethnic segregation. Craft production at Staraya Ladoga reached remarkable levels of sophistication during the 9th and 10th centuries. Archaeological evidence reveals specialized workshops producing glass beads, matching those found in graves throughout Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, indicating that the settlement served as a major production centre for trade goods. Metalworking facilities produced both utilitarian items like tools and weapons and luxury goods including jewellery and decorative fittings that combined Scandinavian artistic traditions with Byzantine and Islamic influences. The defensive works at Staraya Ladoga evolved through multiple construction phases, reflecting the settlement's growing importance and the increasing sophistication of its inhabitants. The earliest fortifications consisted of simple earthen ramparts reinforced with timber palisades, but these were gradually replaced by more substantial stone and timber constructions capable of withstanding prolonged sieges. The discovery of specialized defensive features, including gate towers and flanking bastions, demonstrates knowledge of contemporary European military architecture. Staraya Ladoga's role as a commercial hub is documented through thousands of artifacts representing connections spanning from Greenland to Central Asia. Walrus ivory from Arctic expeditions, amber from Baltic shores, and furs from the northern forest passed through the settlement alongside Byzantine silk, Islamic silver, and spices from distant markets. The standardized weights and measures found throughout the site indicate sophisticated commercial practices and the existence of trusted systems for evaluating and exchanging diverse commodities. The settlement's international character is further demonstrated by the presence of foreign craftsmen and merchants who established permanent residences there. Excavations have revealed workshops operated by specialists in techniques originating from different cultural traditions, including Slavic pottery production, Scandinavian metalworking, and bead-making traditions that may derive from Byzantine or Islamic sources. This concentration of diverse skills created a dynamic environment for technological innovation and cultural exchange. Novgorod's emergence as the political centre of the northern Rus territories occurred gradually during the 10th century, as the settlement's advantageous position at the convergence of multiple river systems made it an inevitable focus for commercial and administrative activities. Unlike Staraya Ladoga, which developed organically as a trading post, Novgorod appears to have been deliberately established as a political centre designed to control access to the southern river routes. The archaeological record from Novgorod reveals careful urban planning that reflects Varangian administrative capabilities. The settlement was divided into distinct districts, each apparently assigned specific functions within the broader commercial and political system. The Slavno district housed commercial activities and foreign merchants, while the Nerev district contained the residences of local administrators and craftsmen. This functional organisation required sophisticated coordination and suggests the presence of experienced urban planners familiar with similar arrangements in other commercial centres. Novgorod's famous veche, or popular assembly, may have originated during the Varangian period as a mechanism for managing relationships between Scandinavian rulers and local populations. Archaeological evidence from the supposed veche site includes substantial timber platforms and amphitheatre-like earthworks that could accommodate large gatherings. While the earliest definitive evidence for veche activities dates to later centuries, the physical infrastructure suggests that formal assembly practices may have much earlier origins. The integration of Scandinavian, Slavic and Finno-Ugric cultures in early Rus territories created distinctive hybrid societies that retained elements from all contributing traditions while developing unique characteristics adapted to local conditions. This cultural synthesis is most clearly visible in material culture, where artifacts combine artistic motifs, technological traditions, and functional requirements from different sources to create distinctly Rus objects. Weapon finds from Varangian period sites demonstrate this cultural blending most dramatically. High-quality Frankish sword blades bearing inscriptions like Ulfbert were combined with Scandinavian-style hilts and Slavic decorative elements to create weapons that served both practical and symbolic functions. Spearheads show similar hybrid characteristics, with Scandinavian blade forms modified according to local preferences and decorated with motifs drawn from multiple artistic traditions. Personal ornaments provide even more detailed evidence of cultural synthesis. Brooches found in women's graves combine Scandinavian functional designs with decorative elements derived from Byzantine, Islamic, and local traditions. The famous tortoise brooches that characterize Scandinavian women's dress appear in modified forms that incorporate Slavic metalworking techniques and decorative preferences. These adaptations suggest not simple cultural dominance but active negotiation between different aesthetic and functional traditions. Pottery production in Varangian territories demonstrates similar patterns of cultural integration. Scandinavian ceramic traditions, characterized by specific vessel forms and surface treatments, were modified through contact with Slavic pottery-making techniques that emphasized different functional requirements and aesthetic preferences. The resulting ceramic assemblages show gradual evolution toward hybrid forms that serve the practical needs of multicultural communities while maintaining connections to ancestral traditions. Religious practices in early Rus territories reveal complex negotiations between different spiritual traditions that ultimately contributed to the region's distinctive cultural character. Archaeological evidence suggests that Scandinavian settlers maintained their traditional religious practices while adapting to local spiritual landscapes that included both Slavic and Finnic elements. Burial practices show particular diversity, with individual graves sometimes containing artifacts associated with multiple religious traditions. The famous chamber graves found throughout Varangian territories demonstrate this religious complexity most clearly. These elaborate burials, clearly derived from Scandinavian traditions, often contain artifacts associated with different spiritual practices, including Slavic amulets, Islamic coins used as protective talismans, and Christian crosses that may represent diplomatic gifts rather than religious conversion. The simultaneous presence of these diverse religious symbols suggests communities where multiple spiritual traditions coexisted rather than competing for exclusive dominance. The emergence of Oleg as the dominant Varangian leader in the late 9th century marked a decisive shift from the fragmented tribal arrangements that had characterized early Rus territories to a unified political structure capable of projecting power across vast distances. Unlike his predecessor Rurik, whose authority remained largely confined to the northern river junction at Novgorod, Oleg possessed the strategic vision and military capability necessary to forge connections between the scattered Varangian settlements from Lake Ladoga to the Black Sea approaches. His rise to power occurred through a combination of calculated political maneuvering and decisive military action that eliminated rival claimants while consolidating control over the most valuable commercial routes in Eastern Europe. The circumstances surrounding Oleg's assumption of power reveal the complex succession practices that governed Varangian leadership during this formative period. Following Rurik's death around 879, the succession theoretically passed to his young son Igor, but the practical requirements of maintaining control over far-flung territories demanded immediate action by an experienced military commander. Oleg, described in the chronicles as Rurik's kinsman and trusted lieutenant, assumed the role of regent with the apparent support of the Novgorod elite, who recognized that effective leadership required proven capability rather than hereditary claims alone. Archaeological evidence from Rurikovo Gorodische during this transitional period shows significant expansion of defensive works and the construction of additional halls capable of housing larger military retinues. The material culture from these layers includes increased quantities of weapons and military equipment, suggesting that Oleg's rise to power coincided with substantial military preparations. Silver hoards buried during this period indicate the accumulation of resources necessary for major military campaigns, while the presence of specialized siege equipment components suggests planning for operations against fortified positions. Oleg's decision to launch a southern expedition targeting Kiev represented a fundamental departure from the primarily commercial focus that had characterized earlier Varangian activities in the region. Intelligence gathered through existing trade networks had revealed Kiev's strategic importance as the gateway to the lower Dnieper and the approaches to Constantinople. The city's position on elevated bluffs overlooking the river provided both defensive advantages and symbolic authority over all traffic attempting to pass, making its control essential for any leader seeking to dominate the entire north-south route system. The expedition that departed from Novgorod in approximately 882 represented the largest coordinated Varangian military operation undertaken to that date. Archaeological evidence from departure points along the northern rivers indicates careful logistical preparation, with substantial quantities of weapons, tools and provisions assembled at strategic locations. The force likely numbered several thousand warriors organised into multiple contingents, each responsible for specific aspects of the campaign, including siege operations, river navigation, and negotiations with potentially hostile populations encountered along the route. The composition of Oleg's army reflected the multicultural nature of Varangian territories by this period, incorporating not only Scandinavian warriors but also Slavic allies and Finnic auxiliaries who possessed specialised knowledge of local conditions. Weapon finds from sites along the expedition's probable route show the distinctive mixture of Scandinavian, Frankish, and locally produced arms that characterised Rus military equipment during this period. The presence of specialised river vessels modified for carrying siege equipment demonstrates the sophisticated planning that preceded the campaign. Oleg's approach to Kiev involved careful reconnaissance and diplomatic preparation, designed to minimise resistance while maximising the psychological impact of his arrival. Contemporary accounts suggest that he employed deception, presenting his force as a commercial expedition while concealing the true size and military nature of his contingent. This strategy allowed the Varangians to approach Kiev's defences without triggering immediate military response, providing crucial advantages for the subsequent assault on the city's fortifications. The rulers of Kiev at the time of Oleg's arrival, Askold and Dir, represented an earlier generation of Varangian leaders who had established themselves in the city during the mid-9th century, but lacked the resources and organisational capability necessary to resist a coordinated assault by Oleg's substantially larger force. Archaeological evidence from Kiev's earliest fortification layers suggests that these rulers had focused primarily on commercial activities rather than military preparations, leaving the city vulnerable to attack by a determined enemy with superior numbers and equipment. The actual seizure of Kiev, accomplished through a combination of military assault and political manoeuvring, eliminated the existing leadership while preserving the city's commercial infrastructure and population. Oleg's forces overwhelmed Kiev's defences through coordinated attacks that exploited weaknesses in the fortification system, while simultaneous political negotiations secured the support of key local leaders who recognised the futility of continued resistance. The speed and efficiency of the conquest demonstrated Oleg's military competence, while establishing his reputation as a leader capable of decisive action. The immediate aftermath of Kiev's conquest revealed Oleg's sophisticated understanding of the administrative requirements for governing a diverse territorial state. Rather than simply installing Scandinavian administrators, he retained existing local officials who possessed essential knowledge of regional conditions, while introducing Varangian military commanders responsible for defence and tribute collection. This hybrid administrative system balanced the need for reliable control with the practical requirements of governing populations, with different cultural traditions and economic practices. Archaeological evidence from Kiev during the early years of Oleg's rule shows massive construction projects that transformed the city from a regional trading centre into the capital of a territorial state. New fortification systems incorporated advanced defensive techniques derived from contemporary European military architecture, while expanded residential areas accommodated the increased population of administrators, craftsmen, and military personnel required for governing the enlarged Rus territories. The construction of substantial halls and ceremonial buildings demonstrated Oleg's intention to establish Kiev as a permanent political centre, rather than merely a commercial outpost. The unification of northern and southern Rus principalities under Oleg's authority created unprecedented opportunities for coordinated military action against external enemies, particularly the Khazar Khaganate, which had previously dominated much of the region through its control of strategic river crossings and tribute relationships with local populations. The Khazars, a Turkic people who had established a powerful state controlling the lower Volga and Don River systems, represented the primary obstacle to Varangian expansion into the lucrative markets of the Caspian Sea region and the Islamic world beyond. Oleg's campaigns against Khazar territories began shortly after his consolidation of control over Kiev, targeting the tributary relationships that provided the Khaganate with much of its wealth and military manpower. Archaeological evidence from former Khazar strongholds along the Don and its tributaries shows destruction layers dating to the late 9th century, indicating systematic Varangian attacks on Khazar defensive positions. These campaigns employed river-based logistics that allowed Rus forces to penetrate deep into Khazar territory, while maintaining secure supply lines back to their northern bases. The military techniques employed in these anti-Khazar campaigns demonstrated significant innovations in Varangian warfare, particularly in the coordination of riverborne and land-based operations. Specialized vessels capable of carrying siege equipment allowed Rus forces to assault fortified positions that had previously been considered impregnable, while coordinated attacks by multiple contingents prevented Khazar forces from concentrating their defences at threatened points. The capture of key Khazar fortresses provided Oleg's forces with advanced bases for further operations, while denying the enemy crucial defensive positions. The establishment of Varangian dominance over previously Khazar-controlled Slavic tribes required careful diplomatic work alongside military conquest. Many Slavic populations had developed complex relationships with Khazar authorities that involved not only tribute payments, but also military service and participation in long-distance trading networks. Oleg's success in transferring these loyalties to Rus authority depended on his ability to provide equivalent economic opportunities while demonstrating superior military capability against potential rivals. Archaeological evidence from Slavic settlements that transferred from Khazar to Rus control shows gradual changes in material culture that reflect new political relationships and trading connections. The appearance of Scandinavian-style weapons and ornaments alongside traditional Slavic artifacts indicates cultural exchange rather than simple conquest, while modifications to defensive work suggest adaptation to new military requirements. The continued prosperity of these settlements demonstrates that the transition to Rus control provided economic benefits that compensated for the disruption of the established relationships. The tribute systems established by Oleg throughout his expanded territories represented sophisticated administrative achievements that required detailed knowledge of local economic conditions and careful negotiation with diverse populations. Unlike simple extraction of wealth through raiding, these systems created sustainable relationships that provided regular income while maintaining local productivity. Archaeological evidence for standardized weights and measures throughout Rus territories indicates centralized control over commercial transactions, while the presence of Rus administrative centers at strategic locations demonstrates the infrastructure necessary for effective tribute collection. The integration of diverse Slavic tribes into Oleg's tribute system involved recognition of existing social structures and traditional leadership patterns, while introducing Varangian oversight designed to ensure reliable compliance with new obligations. Local chiefs retained authority over internal affairs but accepted Rus supervision of external relations and military obligations. This arrangement preserved social stability while providing Oleg with the manpower and resources necessary for major military campaigns, including the famous expedition against Constantinople that would establish his reputation throughout the medieval world. The 907 expedition against Constantinople represented the culmination of Oleg's strategic vision, demonstrating the military potential of the unified Rus state while securing favourable commercial agreements with the Byzantine Empire. The scale of this operation, involving, according to chronicle accounts, over 2,000 vessels and 80,000 warriors, required unprecedented coordination of resources from throughout Oleg's territories. While these numbers may reflect chronicle exaggeration, archaeological evidence from departure points along the Dnieper system confirms substantial military preparations during this period. The logistical challenges of mounting such an expedition demanded sophisticated planning and coordination, that drew upon decades of experience in river-based operations. Specialized vessels designed for carrying siege equipment had to be constructed at multiple locations along the route, while provisions for the enormous force required careful calculation of available resources and coordination with local suppliers. The successful completion of these preparations demonstrated the administrative sophistication that Oleg had developed during his years of territorial expansion. The approach to Constantinople involved navigating the treacherous Dnieper rapids with a massive fleet while maintaining formation discipline and combat readiness against potential Byzantine naval intervention. Archaeological finds from the rapids region include weapons and equipment that may derive from this expedition, while Byzantine sources describe the sudden appearance of an enormous Rus fleet that caught imperial authorities completely unprepared for such a massive assault. The psychological impact of this demonstration of Rus military capability proved as important as any actual combat operations. The siege of Constantinople, while ultimately unsuccessful in capturing the city, achieved Oleg's primary objectives of demonstrating Rus military power and securing favourable terms for future commercial relationships. Byzantine chronicles describe the terror inspired by the Rus assault, including the famous legend of Oleg nailing his shield to the gates of Constantinople as a symbol of victory. Whether or not this specific incident occurred, the expedition clearly established Oleg's reputation as a military leader capable of threatening the most powerful empire in the medieval world. The treaty negotiations that concluded the 907 expedition reveal Oleg's sophisticated understanding of diplomatic practices and commercial requirements. The agreement secured favourable terms for Rus merchants in Constantinople, including reduced customs duties, guaranteed accommodation, and legal protections that facilitated long-distance trade. Archaeological evidence from subsequent years shows increased quantities of Byzantine goods in Rus territories, confirming that the expedition achieved its commercial objectives despite failing to capture the imperial capital. The administrative innovations implemented by Oleg during his reign established the foundation for the medieval Rus state that would dominate Eastern Europe for centuries. The development of standardized legal codes, military organization, and tribute systems created institutional frameworks that survived changes in leadership, while providing stability for the diverse populations under Rus control. Archaeological evidence from administrative centers throughout Oleg's territories shows the construction of specialized buildings designed for record-keeping, treasury functions, and judicial proceedings that demonstrate the sophistication of these early governmental institutions. The death of Oleg around 912 marked the end of an era in Varangian expansion, but the succession of Igor to the throne of Kiev demonstrated the institutional stability that the great conqueror had established during his 3 decades of rule. Unlike the uncertain transition that had brought Oleg to power following Rurik's death, Igor's accession proceeded smoothly through established protocols that balanced hereditary claims with the practical requirements of maintaining control over the vast Rus territories. Archaeological evidence from Kiev during this transitional period shows continued construction projects and commercial activity, indicating that the change in leadership did not disrupt the administrative systems that had made Varangian dominance possible. Igor's early reign faced immediate challenges that tested both his personal capabilities and the resilience of the political structure he had inherited. The Pechenegs, a Turkic nomadic confederation that had established dominance over the southern steppes, launched coordinated attacks against Rus territories that threatened to sever the crucial connections between Kiev and the Black Sea approaches. These assaults differed fundamentally from earlier nomadic raids, employing sophisticated siege techniques and coordinated cavalry operations that suggested external military advisement, possibly from Byzantine sources seeking to destabilize Rus power in the region. The Pecheneg threat required Igor to develop new military strategies that could counter the mobility advantages of steppe cavalry, while protecting the river-based infrastructure that sustained Rus commercial operations. Archaeological evidence from fortified positions constructed during Igor's reign shows the implementation of defensive innovations specifically designed to counter mounted attacks, including the construction of multiple defensive lines with obstacles designed to channel enemy cavalry into prepared killing zones. These fortifications incorporated lessons learned from earlier conflicts while adapting to the specific tactical requirements imposed by Pecheneg warfare. Igor's response to the Pecheneg challenge involved the systematic fortification of key positions along the Dnieper route, transforming what had previously been primarily commercial settlements into integrated military and administrative centres capable of withstanding prolonged sieges. The construction projects undertaken during this period required enormous investments of labour and resources, demonstrating the wealth that Oleg's conquests had made available to his successors. Excavations at these fortified sites reveal sophisticated defensive works that incorporated both Scandinavian military engineering traditions and techniques adapted from Byzantine and Islamic sources. The military reforms implemented during Igor's reign extended beyond defensive preparations to include fundamental changes in Rus army organisation and tactical doctrine. The traditional Varangian emphasis on individual warrior prowess and small unit operations proved inadequate for confronting the large-scale cavalry formations that characterised Pecheneg military organisation. Igor's forces adopted formation fighting techniques that emphasised coordinated action by larger units, while incorporating specialised anti-cavalry weapons and tactics that neutralised the mobility advantages of steppe warfare. Archaeological evidence for these military innovations appears in the form of specialised weapons designed specifically for anti-cavalry operations, including long spears with reinforced points capable of penetrating horse armour and crossbow bolts, designed for maximum penetration against mounted targets. The standardisation of these weapons across multiple sites indicates centralised production and distribution systems that ensured consistent equipment for Rus military forces. The presence of specialised training facilities at major military centres suggests systematic preparation for the new tactical requirements imposed by steppe warfare. The integration of Slavic military traditions into Rus tactical doctrine represented another crucial innovation during Igor's reign. Slavic populations possessed extensive experience in defensive warfare against nomadic raiders, having developed techniques for forest fighting and fortified position defence that complemented Varangian offensive capabilities. The archaeological record shows the adoption of Slavic-style fortification techniques at Varangian strongholds, while weapon finds indicate the integration of Slavic archery traditions with Scandinavian close combat techniques. Igor's first major military expedition targeted the Drevlians, a Slavic tribe that had ceased tribute payments following Oleg's death, apparently calculating that the new ruler lacked the military capability necessary to enforce existing obligations. The campaign against Drevlian territories served multiple purposes beyond simple tribute collection, demonstrating Igor's military competence to potential rivals while testing the effectiveness of his reformed military organisation against opponents who possessed detailed knowledge of Rus tactical methods from their previous incorporation into Oleg's tribute system. The Drevlian campaign revealed both the strengths and limitations of Igor's military reforms. His forces successfully penetrated deep into Drevlian territory and captured several key strongholds, demonstrating improved coordination and tactical flexibility compared to earlier Varangian operations. However, the campaign also exposed logistical weaknesses in the reformed military system, particularly in maintaining supply lines through hostile territory and coordinating operations across multiple widely separated objectives. These lessons proved crucial for the planning of subsequent operations against more formidable opponents. The subjugation of the Drevlians required not only military conquest, but also the reconstruction of administrative relationships that had been disrupted by their rebellion. Archaeological evidence from Drevlian settlements shows the establishment of Rus administrative centres designed to ensure reliable tribute collection while preventing future rebellions. These installations combined military strongholds with commercial facilities that integrated Drevlian populations into broader Rus trading networks, providing economic incentives for continued loyalty alongside the threat of military retaliation for non-compliance. Igor's most ambitious military undertaking, the 941 expedition against Constantinople, represented an attempt to replicate Oleg's spectacular success while establishing his own reputation as a military leader capable of threatening the Byzantine Empire. The scale of preparations for this campaign rivaled those undertaken for Oleg's earlier expedition, with archaeological evidence indicating the construction of specialised siege vessels and the accumulation of enormous quantities of military supplies at staging areas along the Dnieper route. Chronicle accounts suggest that Igor's fleet numbered over 1,000 vessels, though this figure likely represents exaggeration typical of medieval military narratives. The strategic planning for the 941 expedition incorporated lessons learned from Oleg's earlier campaign, while attempting to address the defensive improvements that the Byzantines had implemented in response to the previous Rus threat. Intelligence gathered through commercial networks indicated that Constantinople had strengthened its naval defences and developed new tactical doctrines specifically designed to counter large-scale riverborne assaults. Igor's planners attempted to compensate for these advantages through surprise and overwhelming force concentration, but the execution of these plans would prove catastrophically flawed. The departure of Igor's expedition from Kiev marked the beginning of one of the most disastrous military campaigns in early Rus history. The massive fleet that descended the Dnieper represented an enormous investment of resources and manpower drawn from throughout Igor's territories, but the logistical challenges of coordinating such a large force over the extended distance to Constantinople created vulnerabilities that Byzantine intelligence services were quick to exploit. The seasonal timing of the expedition, launched during the summer sailing season when Byzantine naval forces were at maximum readiness, further compromised the element of surprise that had contributed to Oleg's earlier success. The approach to Constantinople through the Bosphorus exposed Igor's fleet to the full weight of Byzantine naval power, including the deployment of Greek fire weapons that proved devastatingly effective against the wooden vessels of the Rus expedition. Contemporary Byzantine accounts describe the terror and confusion that spread through Igor's fleet as vessels erupted in flames that could not be extinguished by conventional means. The psychological impact of these weapons, previously unknown to Rus forces, contributed to the collapse of formation discipline and the disintegration of coordinated tactical operations. The destruction of Igor's fleet represented more than a simple military defeat. It constituted a catastrophic loss of resources and manpower that threatened the stability of the entire Rus state. Archaeological evidence from the period immediately following the expedition shows the burial of silver hoards and the abandonment of construction projects, indicating economic disruption caused by the enormous losses suffered in the failed campaign. The demographic impact of the disaster appears in cemetery evidence showing increased mortality rates among military-age males, suggesting casualties that extended far beyond the immediate participants in the expedition. The political consequences of the 941 disaster required Igor to rebuild his military reputation, while managing internal challenges from populations that questioned his leadership capabilities. Several Slavic tribes ceased tribute payments following news of the Byzantine defeat, calculating that Igor's weakened position made successful resistance possible. The Pechenegs intensified their raids against Rus territories, apparently recognizing the opportunity presented by the reduced military capacity resulting from the Constantinople expedition's failure. Igor's response to these challenges demonstrated remarkable resilience and strategic adaptation. Rather than attempting to immediately mount another major expedition, he focused on rebuilding his military forces while implementing defensive strategies that maximize the effectiveness of his reduced resources. The construction of new fortifications along vulnerable frontiers provided protection for recovering populations while creating bases for future offensive operations. The recruitment of mercenary forces, including Pecheneg contingents attracted by promises of plunder, compensated for the manpower losses suffered in the Byzantine campaign. The rebuilding process extended beyond simple military reconstruction to encompass fundamental reforms in Rus' administrative and economic systems. Igor implemented new tribute collection methods that reduced the burden on individual populations while increasing overall revenues through improved efficiency and expanded territorial coverage. Archaeological evidence shows the establishment of new commercial centres designed to facilitate trade relationships that provided alternatives to the Byzantine markets that had been disrupted by the failed expedition. The second expedition against Constantinople in 944 reflected the lessons learned from the earlier disaster, while demonstrating Igor's determination to restore Rus' prestige through successful military action. The planning for this campaign emphasized coordination with potential Byzantine enemies, including negotiations with Bulgarian and Hungarian leaders who possessed their own grievances against imperial authority. The reduced scale of the expedition, while still substantial, reflected more realistic assessments of available resources and tactical requirements for success against improved Byzantine defences. The 944 campaign achieved its primary objectives through diplomatic negotiation rather than military conquest, securing a favourable commercial treaty that restored Rus trading privileges while avoiding the catastrophic losses that had characterised the earlier expedition. The treaty terms, preserved in both Rus and Byzantine sources, reveal Igor's sophisticated understanding of diplomatic practices and his recognition that commercial success often provided more lasting benefits than military victories. The agreement established protocols for future Rus-Byzantine relations that would govern interactions between the two powers for decades. The domestic reforms implemented during Igor's later reign addressed the administrative weaknesses that had contributed to the military disasters of his early years. The establishment of standardized tribute collection procedures reduced the opportunities for local resistance, while ensuring more predictable revenues for state operations. Archaeological evidence shows the construction of specialized administrative buildings at major centers throughout Rus territories, indicating the development of bureaucratic institutions capable of managing the complex requirements of governing diverse populations across vast distances. Igor's death in 945, killed during a tribute collection expedition among the Drevlians, marked the end of an era characterized by military expansion and the beginning of a period focused on internal consolidation and administrative development. The circumstances of his death, attributed to excessive greed in demanding additional tribute payments, reflected the ongoing tensions between Varangian rulers and their Slavic subjects that would continue to shape Rus' political development for generations. The succession of his widow Olga to the regency demonstrated the institutional maturity that the Rus state had achieved despite the military setbacks of Igor's reign. Olga's assumption of power as regent for her young son Sviatoslav represented an unprecedented development in Varangian political traditions, which had previously recognized only male leadership in military and administrative roles. Her successful consolidation of authority required not only personal political skill, but also the support of institutional structures that had evolved sufficiently to accept female leadership under exceptional circumstances. Archaeological evidence from Kiev during the early years of Olga's regency shows continued major construction projects and commercial activity, indicating that the transition to female leadership did not disrupt the fundamental operations of the Rus state. The administrative innovations implemented during Olga's regency addressed many of the systemic problems that had plagued Igor's reign, particularly in the areas of tribute collection and provincial administration. Her establishment of standardized tribute rates and collection procedures eliminated much of the arbitrary extraction that had provoked local rebellions, while the creation of permanent administrative centres provided reliable mechanisms for governing distant territories. Archaeological evidence shows the construction of fortified administrative compounds at strategic locations throughout Rus territories, indicating systematic efforts to improve governmental efficiency and control. Olga's famous revenge against the Drevlians for Igor's murder demonstrated both her personal determination and her sophisticated understanding of psychological warfare techniques. The elaborate deceptions employed in eliminating Drevlian leadership, including the legendary burning of their capital through fire-carrying birds, revealed strategic thinking that combined practical military objectives with symbolic demonstrations of Rus power. Whether or not the specific details recorded in later chronicles accurately reflect historical events, the systematic destruction of Drevlian resistance established Olga's reputation as a ruler capable of decisive action against enemies of the state. The conversion of Olga to Christianity around 957 represented a pivotal moment in Rus cultural development, introducing religious and political concepts that would fundamentally alter the character of Varangian civilization in Eastern Europe. Her journey to Constantinople for baptism, recorded in both Rus and Byzantine sources, demonstrated the diplomatic sophistication that characterized her reign, while establishing precedents for future religious and political relationships with the Byzantine Empire. The material culture from this period shows the first significant appearance of Christian symbols and artifacts in Rus archaeological contexts, indicating the beginning of religious transformation that would accelerate under her successors. The administrative reforms implemented during Olga's regency created institutional frameworks that would survive subsequent changes in leadership while providing stability for the diverse populations under Rus control. The establishment of regular tribute collection circuits eliminated much of the arbitrary extraction that had characterized earlier periods, while the creation of permanent administrative positions provided career opportunities for talented individuals regardless of their ethnic origins. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres shows the development of specialized buildings designed for record-keeping and judicial functions, indicating the sophistication of governmental institutions that emerged during this period. The succession crisis that followed Sviatoslav's death in 972 plunged the Rus territories into a period of fratricidal warfare that threatened to undo the political unity achieved through decades of Varangian expansion and consolidation. The division of territories among Sviatoslav's three sons, Yaropolk in Kiev, Oleg among the Drevlians, and Vladimir in Novgorod, created competing power centres that inevitably led to armed conflict, as each brother sought to establish supremacy over the others. Archaeological evidence from this period shows the construction of rival fortification systems and the accumulation of weapon caches at strategic locations, indicating systematic preparation for the civil war that would determine the future structure of the Rus state. Vladimir's initial position as ruler of Novgorod placed him at a significant disadvantage compared to his brothers, who controlled the wealthier southern territories and the crucial commercial routes connecting Kiev to Constantinople. The northern territories, while strategically important for controlling access to the Baltic trade networks, lacked the population density and agricultural productivity necessary to support large military forces. Vladimir's survival during the early phases of the civil war depended on his ability to exploit Novgorod's connections to Scandinavian mercenary sources while building alliances with local Slavic populations who had grown resentful of southern domination. The outbreak of open warfare between the brothers began with Oleg's death in 977 during a conflict with Yaropolk's forces, leaving Vladimir as the sole remaining challenger to Kiev's supremacy. Yaropolk's consolidation of control over both Kiev and the Drevlian territories provided him with overwhelming advantages in terms of resources and manpower, forcing Vladimir to flee to Scandinavia to seek military support from his maternal relatives. This temporary exile proved crucial for Vladimir's eventual success, allowing him to recruit experienced Varangian warriors while developing the strategic alliances that would enable his return to power. The mercenary force that Vladimir assembled in Scandinavia represented a significant evolution in Varangian military organisation, combining traditional warrior bands with specialised units recruited for specific tactical roles. Archaeological evidence from weapon deposits dating to this period shows the presence of standardised equipment manufactured specifically for large-scale military operations, including siege engines and specialised anti-fortification devices that indicate systematic planning for assault operations against heavily defended positions. The scale of these preparations suggests that Vladimir's supporters recognised the campaign's importance for the future of Varangian power in Eastern Europe. Vladimir's return to Novgorod in 980 with his mercenary army marked the beginning of a methodical campaign to eliminate Yaropolk's supporters while consolidating control over the northern territories. The systematic approach to this reconquest involved coordinated attacks on multiple objectives, preventing Yaropolk from concentrating his forces while gradually reducing the territorial base available to support resistance. Archaeological evidence from sites captured during this campaign shows evidence of fierce fighting followed by rapid reconstruction efforts, indicating Vladimir's recognition that military success required the preservation of economic infrastructure necessary for long-term political stability. The siege of Kiev in 980 represented the culmination of Vladimir's campaign against his brother, employing sophisticated siege techniques that demonstrated the military expertise he had acquired during his Scandinavian exile. The city's formidable defensive works, constructed and improved over more than a century of Varangian rule, required innovative approaches that combined traditional assault methods with new technologies adapted from contemporary European military practices. Byzantine sources describe the deployment of specialised siege engines and coordinated attacks by multiple assault columns that overwhelmed Kiev's defenders through superior coordination and equipment. Yaropolk's death during the siege eliminated the last significant opposition to Vladimir's authority, but the new ruler faced the immediate challenge of integrating the diverse military forces that had supported different sides during the civil war. The solution involved careful redistribution of lands and positions that rewarded loyalty while avoiding the appearance of favoritism toward any particular ethnic or regional group. Archaeological evidence from Kiev during the early years of Vladimir's reign shows massive construction projects that provided employment for former combatants, while demonstrating the new ruler's commitment to restoring the city's status as the premier centre of Rus power. The administrative reforms implemented during Vladimir's early reign addressed the systemic weaknesses that had contributed to the succession crisis, establishing clearer protocols for inheritance, while strengthening the institutional frameworks necessary for governing the expanded Rus territories. The appointment of his own sons as governors of major cities created a network of trusted administrators, while providing training for future leadership responsibilities. Archaeological evidence shows the construction of standardized administrative buildings at provincial centres, indicating systematic efforts to improve governmental efficiency and ensure consistent implementation of royal policies. Vladimir's military campaigns during the 980s targeted the remaining independent Slavic tribes and nomadic groups that threatened the stability of Rus territories, employing the enhanced military capabilities developed during the Civil War to eliminate external threats while expanding the tribute base available to support state operations. The conquest of the Radomici and Viatici tribes secured crucial territory along the upper Dnieper and Oka rivers, while successful campaigns against Volga-Bulgarian positions eliminated threats to the eastern trade routes that provided much of the silver necessary for maintaining Vladimir's expanded military forces. The integration of conquered populations into Vladimir's administrative system required sophisticated approaches that balanced the need for reliable control with recognition of local traditions and leadership structures. Archaeological evidence from newly incorporated territories shows the establishment of Rus administrative centres alongside existing settlements, creating dual power structures that maintained local autonomy for internal affairs while ensuring compliance with tribute obligations and military service requirements. This approach proved remarkably successful in preventing the rebellions that had plagued earlier periods of Rus expansion. The polytheistic religious practices that characterized Vladimir's early reign reflected the diverse spiritual traditions present throughout his territories, with archaeological evidence indicating the construction of elaborate temple complexes that housed idols representing Slavic, Scandinavian, and other regional deities. The famous pantheon established in Kiev around 980 included Perun, the Slavic thunder god, Thor, the Scandinavian hammer wielder, and various other deities representing the multicultural nature of Vladimir's realm. These religious installations served both spiritual and political functions, demonstrating royal patronage of diverse traditions, while creating focal points for ceremonial activities that reinforced state authority. The human sacrifices reportedly conducted at these pagan temples, while shocking to later Christian chroniclers, represented established religious practices that served important social and political functions within the context of early medieval Slavic and Scandinavian societies. Archaeological evidence from ritual sites shows the presence of sacrificial deposits that confirm the historical accuracy of chronicle accounts, while also revealing the sophisticated ceremonial procedures that governed these activities. The scale and organisation of these rituals demonstrated state resources and authority, while providing dramatic demonstrations of royal power that impressed both subjects and foreign observers. Vladimir's military expeditions during the mid-980 eras established Rus dominance over crucial frontier regions, while demonstrating the effectiveness of his reformed military organisation against diverse opponents. The successful campaign against the Khazars secured control over the lower Volga trade routes, while operations against Pecheneg positions eliminated immediate threats to the southern approaches to Kiev. Archaeological evidence from captured Khazar fortresses shows systematic destruction followed by reconstruction according to Rus defensive principles, indicating long-term plans for incorporating these strategic positions into the broader Rus defensive network. The wealth accumulated through these successful campaigns provided Vladimir with the resources necessary for the massive construction projects that transformed Kiev into one of medieval Europe's most impressive cities. Expansion of the royal palace complex, the construction of new fortification systems, and the establishment of specialized craft quarters all demonstrated the prosperity that military success had brought to the Rus state. Archaeological excavations reveal evidence of international trade connections extending from Scandinavia to Constantinople, with luxury goods from diverse sources indicating Kiev's emergence as a major centre of medieval European commerce. The diplomatic relationships established during Vladimir's early reign reflected his recognition that military success required careful management of international alliances and commercial partnerships. The marriage alliances contracted with neighbouring rulers provided security for Rus frontiers, while opening opportunities for profitable trade relationships. Archaeological evidence shows increased quantities of foreign goods in Rus territories during this period, including Byzantine silk, Islamic silver, and Western European manufactured items that demonstrate the expansion of commercial networks under Vladimir's rule. The legendary account of Vladimir's choosing of faiths around 987, while likely embellished by later Christian chroniclers, reflects genuine diplomatic and religious considerations that influenced the ruler's eventual decision to adopt Byzantine Christianity. The story of embassies from Islamic, Jewish, Western Christian, and Byzantine representatives presenting their respective religious traditions to Vladimir demonstrates the cosmopolitan nature of his court and the careful deliberation that preceded such a momentous decision. Archaeological evidence from this period shows the presence of religious artifacts representing multiple traditions, confirming the multicultural spiritual environment that characterized Vladimir's realm. The practical considerations that influenced Vladimir's religious decision extended far beyond personal spiritual concerns to encompass crucial political and economic factors that would determine the future development of Rus civilization. The adoption of Islam would have required abandoning the alcohol consumption and pork eating that formed important elements of Scandinavian and Slavic cultural traditions, while Judaism lacked the imperial backing necessary for supporting Rus political ambitions. Western Christianity offered connections to the emerging Holy Roman Empire, but Byzantine Christianity provided access to the wealth and sophisticated culture of Constantinople while maintaining the political independence that Vladimir considered essential for Rus sovereignty. The marriage alliance negotiated with Byzantine Emperor Basil II in 988 represented one of medieval Europe's most significant diplomatic achievements, linking the Rus state to the most prestigious imperial dynasty while securing military cooperation against mutual enemies. The terms of this agreement required Vladimir to provide military assistance against the Bulgarian rebels who threatened Byzantine control over the Balkans, while Basil promised his sister Anna in marriage to Vladimir following his conversion to Christianity. Archaeological evidence from this period shows the preparation of substantial military forces for deployment to Byzantine territories, including specialized equipment designed for siege operations against fortified positions. The Varangian military expedition that departed for Byzantine territories in 988 represented the largest coordinated military operation undertaken by Rus forces since the disasters of Igor's reign, involving thousands of warriors equipped with the most advanced weapons and siege equipment available. The logistical challenges of transporting and supplying such a force over the extended distance to the Balkan theatres required sophisticated planning and coordination that demonstrated the administrative capabilities Vladimir had developed during his consolidation of power. Contemporary Byzantine sources describe the arrival of this Rus army as a decisive factor in suppressing the Bulgarian rebellion and restoring imperial authority over the disputed territories. The successful completion of military operations in support of Basil II established Vladimir's reputation as a reliable ally, while demonstrating Rus military capabilities to potential enemies throughout the region. The Varangian warriors who participated in these campaigns gained valuable experience in siege warfare and coordinated operations that would prove crucial for future military enterprises, while the wealth acquired through Byzantine service provided resources for the massive construction projects that would follow Vladimir's conversion to Christianity. Archaeological evidence from this period shows increased quantities of Byzantine goods in Rus territories, confirming the economic benefits that resulted from the military alliance. Vladimir's baptism in 988, whether conducted in Kiev or Cherson as various sources suggest, marked the beginning of the most profound cultural transformation in Rus history, introducing religious concepts and institutional practices that would fundamentally alter the character of Varangian civilization in Eastern Europe. The mass baptism of Kiev's population that followed Vladimir's conversion, conducted in the Dnieper River according to chronicle accounts, represented a dramatic break with centuries of pagan tradition, while establishing Christianity as the official religion of the Rus state. Archaeological evidence from this period shows the systematic destruction of pagan temples and idols, replaced by the construction of Christian churches that employed Byzantine architectural principles and decorative programs. The establishment of the Rus Orthodox Church required the importation of trained clergy, religious texts, and liturgical objects from Byzantine territories, creating new channels for cultural exchange that would profoundly influence Rus intellectual and artistic development. The construction of the Church of the Tithes in Kiev, begun shortly after Vladimir's conversion, represented the first major Christian architectural project in Rus territories, employing Byzantine craftsmen and materials to create a structure that demonstrated the ruler's commitment to his new faith while providing a magnificent setting for royal ceremonial activities. The Christianization of Rus society extended far beyond simple religious conversion to have encompassed fundamental changes in legal systems, social relationships, and cultural practices that had characterized Varangian civilization for centuries. The introduction of Byzantine legal concepts, particularly regarding marriage, inheritance, and criminal justice, required careful adaptation to existing Slavic and Scandinavian traditions while establishing new standards for social behaviour. Archaeological evidence shows changes in burial practices, with the traditional grave goods and cremation ceremonies of pagan periods gradually replaced by Christian interment practices that reflected new beliefs about death and afterlife. The educational initiatives launched following Vladimir's conversion represented unprecedented efforts to create literate administrative and religious classes capable of managing the complex requirements of a Christian state. The establishment of schools for the children of nobles and merchants provided training in reading, writing, and religious instruction that would prove essential for the development of Rus literary and intellectual culture. Archaeological evidence from this period shows the appearance of writing implements, religious texts, and educational materials that confirm the systematic nature of these educational efforts. The economic impact of Christianization involved both immediate costs and long-term benefits that would shape Rus development for centuries. The construction of churches, monasteries, and religious institutions required enormous investments of labour and resources, while the support of clergy and religious activities created new categories of state expenditure. However, the enhanced diplomatic relationships with Byzantium and other Christian powers opened new opportunities for profitable trade, while the institutional frameworks provided by the Church created mechanisms for social organisation and economic coordination that strengthened the overall effectiveness of state administration. The resistance to Christianization in some regions of Vladimir's realm required careful management that balanced religious objectives with political stability, employing both persuasion and coercion to ensure compliance with the new religious requirements. Archaeological evidence from areas that initially resisted conversion shows the gradual replacement of pagan religious sites with Christian installations, often built directly over earlier temples to symbolize the triumph of the new faith. The integration of former pagan priests into Christian hierarchies provided continuity for local populations, while ensuring that religious leadership supported rather than opposed the conversion process. The transformation of Varangian military culture through Christianization involved the adoption of new concepts of warfare that emphasized the protection of non-combatants and the limitation of violence according to Christian moral principles. The traditional Varangian practices of slave-taking and indiscriminate raiding gradually gave way to more regulated forms of warfare that reflected Christian teachings about just war and proper treatment of enemies. Archaeological evidence shows changes in weapon types and military equipment that may reflect these evolving attitudes toward warfare and violence. The development of distinctly Rus forms of Christianity involved the synthesis of Byzantine religious traditions with existing Slavic and Scandinavian cultural elements, creating unique expressions of Christian faith that reflected the multicultural nature of Vladimir's realm. The architectural styles employed in early Rus churches combined Byzantine structural principles with decorative elements derived from local artistic traditions, while liturgical practices incorporated Slavic language and cultural references that made Christianity more accessible to local populations. Archaeological evidence shows the gradual development of distinctly Rus religious art and architecture that maintained connections to Byzantine models, while expressing local cultural values and aesthetic preferences. The establishment of the Varangian Guard in Constantinople around 988 CE emerged from the convergence of Byzantine military necessity and the availability of highly skilled Scandinavian warriors seeking profitable service under the most prestigious ruler in the medieval world. Emperor Basil II faced a critical military situation as Bulgarian rebels under Samuel threatened to dismember the empire's Balkan territories, while domestic conspiracies challenged his authority from within the capital itself. The traditional Byzantine military units, weakened by decades of civil warfare and political purges, lacked the reliability and combat effectiveness necessary to address these multiple threats simultaneously. The arrival of Vladimir's Varangian expeditionary force provided Basil with exactly the type of elite troops he required: experienced warriors with no local political connections who could be trusted to remain loyal to imperial authority regardless of domestic political pressures. The initial Varangian contingent that formed the nucleus of the Guard consisted of approximately 6,000 warriors drawn from the most experienced units in Vladimir's army, men who had proven their capabilities during the consolidation of Rus territories and possessed the sophisticated military skills necessary for imperial service. These warriors brought with them the accumulated tactical knowledge of generations of Scandinavian warfare, including expertise in siege operations, naval combat, and the coordinated infantry formations that had made Varangian armies so effective throughout Eastern Europe. Their equipment reflected the highest standards of contemporary military technology, featuring Frankish swords with pattern-welded blades, reinforced mail shirts manufactured according to Scandinavian specifications, and the distinctive round shields that would become synonymous with Varangian military identity. The Guard's initial deployment against the Bulgarian rebels demonstrated their exceptional combat capabilities while establishing their reputation as the Empire's most reliable military unit. The siege of Vidin in 989 showcased Varangian expertise in assault operations, as Guard units systematically reduced the fortress's defensive works through coordinated attacks that combined traditional Scandinavian berserker charges with sophisticated siege techniques adapted from Byzantine military manuals. The psychological impact of these northern warriors, with their towering height, distinctive weapons, and fearsome battle cries, proved as valuable as their tactical skills in breaking enemy morale during crucial engagements. The successful suppression of the Bulgarian rebellion within 2 years of the Guard's establishment confirmed Basil's decision to incorporate these foreign warriors into the imperial military structure on a permanent basis. The Guard's performance during the final assault on Samuel's capital at Ohrid demonstrated their ability to operate effectively in diverse terrain and tactical situations, from mountain warfare to siege operations against heavily fortified positions. Contemporary Byzantine accounts describe the methodical professionalism with which Varangian units executed complex military operations, maintaining formation discipline under extreme pressure while adapting their tactics to meet unexpected challenges. The recruitment practices established for the Varangian Guard during its early years create a selective process that attracted the most capable warriors from throughout Scandinavia, while maintaining the unit's elite character and combat effectiveness. Prospective guards underwent rigorous evaluation that assessed not only their individual fighting skills, but also their ability to function within the disciplined environment required for imperial service. The recruitment process typically began in the major trading centres of Novgorod and Kiev, where imperial agents maintained permanent stations to evaluate candidates and coordinate their transportation to Constantinople. Archaeological evidence from these recruitment centres includes standardised weapons and equipment caches, suggesting systematic preparation of Guard candidates before their departure for Byzantine service. The journey to Constantinople served as an extended evaluation period, during which potential Guards demonstrated their endurance, discipline, and commitment to imperial service. The route through the Dnieper Rapids and across the Black Sea presented numerous challenges that tested candidates' physical capabilities while providing opportunities to assess their character and reliability under stress. Those who completed this arduous journey and passed final evaluations in Constantinople joined a military unit that offered unprecedented opportunities for advancement and enrichment, but also demanded absolute loyalty and professional competence that exceeded the standards expected of ordinary imperial troops. The oath ceremonies that formally inducted new members into the Varangian Guard represented solemn rituals that combined Scandinavian warrior traditions with Byzantine imperial symbolism to create binding commitments that transcended ordinary military service obligations. The ceremony typically took place in the Hagia Sophia, where candidates swore personal loyalty to the emperor while receiving blessed weapons that symbolized their sacred duty to defend imperial authority. The oath itself, administered in Old Norse to ensure complete understanding, bound guards to absolute obedience to imperial commands while guaranteeing their faithful service until death or honourable discharge. Archaeological evidence from guard barracks includes oath rings and ceremonial weapons that confirm the importance placed on these ritualistic aspects of guard service. The unique legal status accorded to Varangian guards within the Byzantine Empire reflected imperial recognition of their exceptional value, while acknowledging the special circumstances of their service far from their homelands. Guards enjoyed legal privileges that distinguished them from ordinary imperial subjects, including the right to maintain their traditional religious practices, exemption from certain imperial taxes, and access to imperial courts for the resolution of disputes involving their service obligations. These privileges extended to their families and dependents, creating a distinct legal category that facilitated the integration of foreign warriors into Byzantine society, while preserving their cultural identity and military effectiveness. The Guard's privileged legal position included specific protections against arbitrary punishment or dismissal, ensuring that their service contracts could not be violated without due process according to established imperial procedures. This legal security proved crucial for maintaining Guard loyalty and effectiveness, as warriors could serve with confidence that their sacrifices would be properly rewarded and their rights protected according to established precedent. The legal framework governing Guard service evolved through imperial legislation that addressed specific issues arising from their unique status, creating a comprehensive system of military law that balanced imperial authority with recognition of Guard rights and traditions. Property rights represented another crucial aspect of the Guard's legal status, with specific provisions allowing Guards to accumulate wealth through their service while maintaining ownership of assets acquired during their imperial careers. The famous palace law governing Guard inheritance rights ensured that deceased Guards' property passed to their designated heirs according to Scandinavian legal traditions rather than Byzantine inheritance practices, recognizing the cultural differences that distinguished Guard service from ordinary imperial military obligations. Archaeological evidence from Guard residential areas in Constantinople includes substantial private dwellings and accumulated treasure deposits that confirm the wealth that successful Guard service could provide. The Guard's role in major imperial campaigns extended far beyond their initial service against the Bulgarian rebels to encompass participation in virtually every significant military operation undertaken during the reigns of Basil II and his successors. Their deployment to Sicily beginning in 1038 marked their first major overseas assignment, where Guard units served alongside Norman mercenaries and imperial regulars in campaigns designed to reassert Byzantine control over territories lost to Islamic conquest. The Sicilian campaigns demonstrated the Guard's adaptability to different climatic conditions and tactical requirements, as warriors accustomed to the forests and rivers of northern Europe proved equally effective in the Mediterranean environment of southern Italy. The Siege of Syracuse in 1040 showcased Varangian expertise in amphibious operations, as Guard units coordinated naval and land-based attacks that systematically reduced the city's defensive works while preventing enemy reinforcements from reaching the besieged garrison. Contemporary accounts describe the methodical approach employed by Varangian commanders, who combined their traditional siege techniques with innovations adapted from Islamic military practices encountered during the campaign. The successful capture of Syracuse after a prolonged siege established the Guard's reputation for persistence and professional competence in extended operations far from their supply bases. The Guard's service in the Balkan campaigns against various Slavic and nomadic enemies demonstrated their continued effectiveness in the type of warfare for which their Scandinavian origins had originally prepared them. Operations against Pecheneg raiders along the Danube frontier required the mobility and tactical flexibility that characterized traditional Varangian military methods, while campaigns against Serbian and Croatian principalities involved the siege warfare and diplomatic negotiations that had become standard aspects of imperial military policy. Archaeological evidence from former Guard positions along the Balkan frontiers includes fortified camps and weapons deposits that confirm their extensive service in these challenging theatres of operation. The confrontation with Arab forces in Syria and Anatolia presented the Guard with their most formidable opponents, as Islamic armies possessed sophisticated tactical doctrines and military technologies that rivaled or exceeded Byzantine capabilities in many areas. The Battle of Cannae in 1018 saw Varangian units employed as shock troops in coordinated attacks that broke through Arab defensive lines, while their performance during the siege of Aleppo demonstrated their ability to adapt their traditional assault techniques to overcome the advanced fortification systems employed by Islamic military engineers. The Guard's success against these formidable opponents confirmed their status as the Empire's premier military unit, while establishing their reputation throughout the medieval world. The Guard's involvement in Byzantine palace politics began almost immediately after their establishment, as their unique position as the Emperor's personal troops inevitably drew them into the complex factional disputes that characterized imperial court life. Their first major political intervention occurred during the conspiracy of Bardus Phocas in 989, when Guard units remained loyal to Basil II, despite attempts by the rebel general to suborn their allegiance through promises of increased pay and privileges. The Guard's decisive action in suppressing this rebellion demonstrated their reliability as defenders of imperial authority, while establishing precedents for their role in domestic political crises. The Guard's reputation for unwavering loyalty became legendary throughout the Byzantine Empire, earning them the trust of successive emperors who relied on their protection against both external enemies and internal conspiracies. This reputation was built through consistent performance in numerous political crises, including their role in suppressing the revolt of Bardus Clerus and their protection of the imperial family during various palace coups and assassination attempts. Contemporary sources describe the psychological effect of the Guard's presence on potential conspirators, whose plots often collapsed when faced with the certainty of confronting these formidable northern warriors. The Guard's loyalty stemmed not from blind obedience, but from a sophisticated understanding of their position within the imperial system and the benefits that faithful service provided for their personal advancement and enrichment. Their oath of personal loyalty to the emperor created direct relationships that transcended the complex hierarchies and competing loyalties that characterized other imperial military units, while their foreign origins insulated them from the domestic political pressures that often compromised the reliability of native Byzantine troops. This combination of personal commitment and political independence made the Guard uniquely valuable as defenders of imperial authority during periods of political instability. The military prowess that distinguished the Varangian Guard throughout their service derived from the combination of exceptional individual warrior skills with sophisticated unit tactics that reflected centuries of Scandinavian military evolution. Guard training emphasized the development of personal combat abilities that enabled individual warriors to function effectively in single combat, while maintaining the formation discipline necessary for coordinated unit operations. Archaeological evidence from Guard training facilities includes specialized weapons designed for instruction purposes and protective equipment that allowed realistic combat practice without excessive casualties among trainees. The Guard's weapon preferences reflected both their Scandinavian heritage and their adaptation to Byzantine military requirements, with most guards carrying the traditional long-handled axes that became their signature weapons alongside high-quality swords manufactured according to Frankish specifications. The famous Varangian axe, with its broad cutting edge and reinforced handle, proved devastatingly effective against both mounted and infantry opponents while serving as a powerful psychological weapon that intimidated enemies through its association with northern warrior traditions. Contemporary accounts describe the terrifying effect of massed Varangian axe charges, where hundreds of guards advanced in tight formation while wielding their weapons with deadly precision. The Guards' tactical doctrine emphasized aggressive offensive operations that utilized their superior individual combat skills and unit cohesion to overwhelm enemy positions through concentrated attacks at decisive points. Their preferred formation, known as the Boar's Head, concentrated the most experienced warriors at the front of a wedge-shaped attack column that could penetrate enemy lines through sheer momentum and fighting skill. This formation required exceptional discipline and coordination, as individual guards had to maintain their positions within the advancing wedge while engaging in intense personal combat with enemy defenders. The Guards' reputation for ferocity in battle was balanced by their professional approach to military operations, which emphasized careful planning, thorough reconnaissance, and systematic execution of complex tactical maneuvers. Their commanders, typically drawn from the most experienced guards who had demonstrated both combat prowess and leadership abilities, possessed sophisticated understanding of military strategy that enabled them to adapt traditional Scandinavian tactics to the diverse operational requirements of imperial service. The Guards' military effectiveness resulted from this combination of individual warrior excellence with collective tactical sophistication that distinguished them from both barbarian warbands and conventional imperial military units. The wealth accumulated by successful guards through their imperial service created opportunities for social advancement that would have been impossible in their Scandinavian homelands, where rigid social hierarchies limited the prospects available to even the most capable warriors. The imperial system rewarded military excellence with financial compensation, land grants, and access to commercial opportunities that enabled enterprising guards to establish themselves as wealthy landowners or successful merchants. Archaeological evidence from former guard residential areas includes substantial private residences and accumulated treasure hoards that demonstrate the prosperity that imperial service could provide for those who survived its dangers and distinguished themselves through exceptional performance. The Guards' integration into Byzantine society involved complex negotiations between their desire to maintain their cultural identity and the practical requirements of functioning within an alien social and political environment. Many Guards married Byzantine women and established permanent residences in Constantinople, creating hybrid households that combined Scandinavian and Byzantine cultural elements while maintaining connections to their northern homelands through continued participation in guard activities and ceremonies. The children of these marriages often served as cultural intermediaries who facilitated communication between the Guard and broader Byzantine society, while preserving knowledge of Scandinavian traditions and practices. The Guards' influence on Byzantine military culture extended beyond their direct participation in imperial campaigns to encompass the adoption of Scandinavian tactical innovations and training methods by other imperial military units. The success of Varangian formations inspired attempts to replicate their effectiveness through the recruitment and training of native Byzantine troops according to northern military principles, while guard weapons and equipment became models for imperial armaments production. Archaeological evidence shows the widespread adoption of Scandinavian-style weapons and armour throughout the imperial military during the period of guard service, indicating the broader impact of their presence on Byzantine military development. The ceremonial duties that occupied much of the Varangian Guard's time in Constantinople provided a stark contrast to the brutal realities of campaign warfare, yet these functions proved equally important for maintaining their elite status within the imperial hierarchy. The daily routine of palace security involved intricate protocols that required guards to master complex ceremonial procedures while remaining constantly alert for potential threats to imperial safety. The guards' quarters within the Great Palace complex, located strategically between the imperial residential areas and the main administrative buildings, allowed rapid response to emergencies while symbolising their role as the ultimate guardians of imperial authority. Archaeological excavations in these areas have revealed substantial barracks buildings with individual sleeping chambers, communal dining halls, and specialised armouries that house the guards' extensive weapons collections and ceremonial equipment. The wealth that successful guards accumulated through their imperial service created unprecedented opportunities for social mobility that attracted ambitious young warriors from throughout Scandinavia. The standard guard salary, paid in gold numismata, exceeded the annual income of most European nobles, while additional compensation for campaign service and special duties could multiply these earnings several times over. Guards who survived their terms of service often returned to their homelands as wealthy men capable of purchasing substantial estates and establishing themselves among the local aristocracy. The famous example of Harald Sigurdsson, who would later become King Harald Hardrada of Norway, demonstrated the transformative potential of guard service for those who combined military prowess with political acumen and financial shrewdness. Harald's arrival in Constantinople around 1034 marked the beginning of the most celebrated individual career in Varangian Guard history, though his path to imperial service differed significantly from the typical recruitment patterns that brought most guards to Byzantine territories. The defeat and death of his half-brother Olaf II at the Battle of Stiklestad in 1030 had forced the 15-year-old Harald into exile, beginning a period of wandering that would eventually lead him to the imperial capital. His initial service with Yaroslav the Wise in Kiev provided valuable military experience and political connections that facilitated his eventual recruitment into the Guard, while his royal bloodline distinguished him from the common warriors who typically comprised the unit's membership. The young Harald's exceptional height and physical strength, combined with his royal bearing and obvious intelligence, immediately marked him as a potential leader within the Guard hierarchy. Contemporary Byzantine sources describe him as towering above even his fellow Scandinavians, with blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that commanded attention in any gathering. His initial assignment to routine palace duties allowed him to observe the complex political dynamics that governed imperial court life, while developing the diplomatic skills that would prove crucial for his later advancement. The Guard's multinational composition during this period included not only Scandinavians, but also Anglo-Saxon refugees from the Norman conquest, creating a cosmopolitan military environment where Harald could learn from warriors with diverse tactical backgrounds and cultural perspectives. Harald's first major campaign assignment came during the renewed Byzantine offensive in Sicily, where Guard units were deployed to support the empire's attempt to reclaim territories lost to Arab conquest. The logistical challenges of transporting and supplying Guard forces across the Mediterranean required sophisticated planning that demonstrated the administrative capabilities Harald had developed during his early years of imperial service. The campaign itself provided opportunities for displaying the tactical innovations that would distinguish Harald's military career, including his development of new siege techniques that combined traditional Scandinavian assault methods with engineering principles adapted from Islamic military manuals captured during previous campaigns. The Siege of Syracuse in 1038 showcased Harald's emerging reputation as a military innovator, as he developed novel approaches to reducing fortified positions that minimized Guard casualties while maximizing the psychological impact on enemy defenders. His famous use of fire-bearing birds to ignite the thatched roofs of buildings within the besieged city demonstrated the creative thinking that characterized his approach to military problems, while his coordination of simultaneous attacks from multiple directions revealed sophisticated understanding of combined arms tactics. The successful capture of Syracuse after a relatively brief siege established Harold's reputation among his fellow guards, while bringing him to the attention of senior imperial commanders who recognised his potential for independent command responsibilities. The wealth that Harold accumulated during his Sicilian service provided the financial foundation for his later political ambitions. A successful campaign participation entitled guards to substantial shares of captured booty alongside their regular imperial salaries. The systematic looting of captured cities, conducted according to established imperial protocols that reserved specific categories of valuables for the imperial treasury while distributing the remainder among participating troops, could yield enormous sums for individual guards who distinguished themselves during assault operations. Harold's careful management of his growing fortune, including investments in commercial ventures and strategic acquisitions of portable wealth that could be easily transported during future campaigns, demonstrated the financial acumen that would enable his eventual return to Scandinavian politics as a serious contender for royal power. The Guard service in southern Italy during the late 1030s and early 1040s involved complex political negotiations alongside military operations as Byzantine commanders sought to exploit the factional disputes that divided their Islamic opponents while managing relationships with Norman mercenaries whose ultimate loyalties remained questionable. Harold's participation in these diplomatic activities provided valuable experience in the type of multi-party negotiations that characterized medieval political relationships, while his growing reputation as a successful military commander enhanced his credibility as a potential negotiating partner for both imperial authorities and local political leaders. The campaign against Arab positions in Sicily required guard units to adapt their traditional tactical methods to the challenging terrain and climatic conditions of the Mediterranean theatre, where the forests and rivers that had shaped Scandinavian military traditions were replaced by arid mountains and fortified coastal cities. Harold's development of new assault techniques specifically designed for reducing stone fortifications demonstrated his ability to synthesize tactical knowledge from diverse sources while maintaining the aggressive, offensive spirit that characterized Varangian military culture. His innovations included the use of specialized siege engines adapted from Islamic designs, coordinated naval and land-based attacks that exploited enemy weaknesses, and psychological warfare techniques that demoralized defenders through displays of overwhelming force and determination. The Guard's reputation for military excellence during this period attracted additional recruits from throughout northern Europe, including substantial numbers of Anglo-Saxon warriors who had fled England following the Norman conquest of 1066. These new arrivals brought different tactical traditions and equipment preferences that enriched the Guard's military capabilities while creating challenges for unit cohesion and command authority. Harold's role in integrating these diverse elements into effective military formations demonstrated his leadership abilities while providing experience in managing multicultural military organizations that would prove valuable during his later career as an independent ruler. The accumulation of combat experience during multiple campaigns in Sicily and southern Italy transformed Harold from a promising young warrior into one of the most capable military commanders in the imperial service, with expertise spanning siege warfare, naval operations, mountain fighting, and the complex logistics required for extended overseas campaigns. His systematic study of enemy tactics and defensive techniques, combined with his natural talent for tactical innovation, produced a comprehensive understanding of contemporary military science that exceeded the knowledge possessed by most European commanders of his era. The detailed notes and sketches that Harold reportedly maintained during his campaigns, while not surviving in their original form, influenced the tactical manuals that later Byzantine military writers compiled for training future generations of imperial officers. The Guard's service in the eastern theatres of imperial military activity provided different challenges that tested their adaptability to yet another set of tactical and environmental conditions. as campaigns against Arab forces in Syria and Anatolia required operations in desert environments against opponents who possessed sophisticated military technologies and tactical doctrines. Harold's participation in these eastern campaigns during the early 1040s exposed him to the most advanced military techniques available in the medieval world, including the use of Greek fire, sophisticated siege engines, and coordinated cavalry infantry tactics that represented the pinnacle of contemporary military science. The Siege of Edessa in 1042 marked the culmination of Harold's military education within the imperial service, as he commanded a mixed force of guards and imperial regulars in operations against one of the most formidable fortresses in the eastern frontier region. The successful reduction of this strategic position required the coordination of multiple assault columns, the deployment of specialized siege equipment, and the maintenance of complex supply lines across hostile territory. Harold's systematic approach to these challenges, involving detailed reconnaissance, careful resource allocation, and contingency planning for various tactical scenarios, demonstrated the professional competence that distinguished successful imperial commanders from mere warriors. The political complications that arose during Harold's later years of guard service reflected the complex factional disputes that characterized imperial court politics during the mid-11th century, as competing aristocratic families sought to influence imperial policy while pursuing their own territorial and commercial interests. Harold's growing wealth and military reputation inevitably drew him into these political networks, where his foreign origins provided both advantages and disadvantages in navigating the intricate relationships that determined advancement within the imperial hierarchy. His careful cultivation of relationships with key court officials while maintaining his primary loyalty to the emperor demonstrated the diplomatic skills that would prove essential for his eventual transition from imperial service to independent political leadership. The gradual transformation of the Varangian Guard's composition during Harold's service period reflected broader changes in the political and military circumstances that had originally created the unit's unique character and capabilities. The increasing recruitment of Anglo-Saxon refugees following the Norman conquest introduced warriors with different cultural backgrounds and military traditions, while the declining availability of Scandinavian recruits forced imperial authorities to modify their selection criteria and training procedures. These changes, while maintaining the Guard's military effectiveness, began to dilute the specifically Scandinavian character that had originally distinguished the unit from other imperial military formations. The administrative reforms implemented during the reign of Constantine IX Monomachos affected the Guard's legal status and operational procedures, as imperial authorities sought to standardize military organization while reducing the special privileges that had traditionally distinguished Guard service from ordinary imperial military obligations. These changes created tensions within the Guard hierarchy, where senior members like Harold possessed vested interests in maintaining traditional privileges, while newer recruits often lacked the cultural background necessary for understanding the historical precedents that justified the Guard's unique position within the imperial system. Harold's decision to leave imperial service around 1043 reflected both his accumulated wealth and his growing ambitions for independent political leadership, as well as his recognition that the changing character of the Guard reduced the opportunities for further advancement within the imperial hierarchy. His careful preparations for departure, including the conversion of his accumulated wealth into portable forms that could be easily transported during his return journey to Scandinavia, demonstrated the financial planning that had characterized his entire imperial career. The substantial treasure that Harold carried with him upon leaving Constantinople, estimated by contemporary sources as sufficient to finance major military campaigns, provided the material foundation for his subsequent bid for the Norwegian throne. The impact of Harold's Guard service on his later career as King of Norway demonstrated the transformative potential of imperial military experience for ambitious Scandinavian leaders, as the tactical knowledge, administrative skills, and political connections he had acquired during his Byzantine years proved crucial for his success in establishing royal authority over the fractious Norwegian territories. His innovations in military organisation, siege warfare, and diplomatic negotiation reflected the sophisticated understanding of statecraft that he had developed through observation of imperial governmental procedures and participation in complex military campaigns across multiple theatres of operation. The continuing recruitment of Scandinavian warriors into the Varangian Guard during the mid-11th century maintained connections between the imperial capital and the northern homelands, creating networks of communication and cultural exchange that influenced political developments throughout the region. Former guards who returned to Scandinavia brought with them not only accumulated wealth, but also knowledge of advanced military techniques, administrative procedures, and commercial practices that enhanced the capabilities of Northern European political entities. The gradual diffusion of Byzantine influence through these returning veterans contributed to the sophistication of Scandinavian political institutions while maintaining the cultural connections that had originally facilitated Varangian expansion into Eastern Europe. The Guard's participation in the Empire's final major campaigns in southern Italy during the 1040s and 1050s marked the end of an era in Byzantine military expansion, as imperial resources became increasingly focused on defending existing territories rather than acquiring new conquests. The changing strategic priorities that characterised this period reduced the opportunities for the type of profitable campaign service that had originally attracted ambitious warriors to Guard recruitment, while the Empire's growing reliance on mercenary forces from diverse sources diluted the special status that had traditionally distinguished Varangian service from other forms of military employment. The Battle of Hastings in 1066, which eliminated the Anglo-Saxon kingdom that had provided increasing numbers of Guard recruits during the previous decades, marked a decisive turning point in the unit's recruitment patterns and cultural composition. The Norman victory not only removed a major source of potential Guards, but also demonstrated the effectiveness of new military techniques that challenged the tactical superiority that had originally justified the Guard's elite status within the imperial military hierarchy. The gradual adaptation of these tactical innovations by other imperial military units reduced the unique advantages that had made Varangian service so valuable to imperial commanders, beginning the process of institutional change that would eventually transform the Guard from an elite foreign unit into a more conventional imperial military formation. The gradual eclipse of Varangian military dominance in the decades following the Norman conquest fundamentally altered the character of political authority throughout the Rus territories, as the traditional warrior merchant elite found themselves increasingly dependent on Slavic administrative structures and local power networks that had evolved independently of Scandinavian influence. The death of Yaroslav the Wise in 1054 marked the end of the last generation of rulers who maintained direct personal connections to Scandinavian political traditions, leaving his successors to govern territories where the majority population had developed distinctly Slavic cultural identities that bore little resemblance to the northern warrior societies from which their rulers had originally emerged. Archaeological evidence from major Rus cities during this transitional period shows the systematic replacement of Scandinavian-style residential compounds with architectural forms that reflected Byzantine and local Slavic building traditions, while weapon deposits indicate the gradual abandonment of traditional Varangian military equipment in favour of arms and armour that conformed to broader European standards. The linguistic transformation that accompanied this cultural shift proved particularly significant for the long-term development of Rus political institutions, as the Old Norse terminology that had characterized early Varangian administrative practices gave way to Slavic vocabulary that reflected the practical requirements of governing predominantly Slavic populations. Legal documents from the mid-11th century show the increasing use of Slavic legal concepts alongside traditional Scandinavian juridical procedures, creating hybrid legal systems that attempted to balance the customary rights of different ethnic communities while maintaining the authority of Varangian rulers. The gradual disappearance of runic inscriptions from official documents and monumental stones mark the final abandonment of Scandinavian written traditions in favour of Cyrillic script that facilitated communication with Byzantine authorities and provided access to the extensive religious and administrative literature that supported Christian governmental practices. The administrative reforms initiated during Yaroslav's reign represented systematic attempts to codify the complex legal relationships that had evolved through centuries of interaction between Varangian rulers and their diverse subjects, creating written legal codes that could provide consistent standards for judicial proceedings throughout the expanded Rus territories. The compilation of the Russkaya Pravda during the 1010s and 1020s involved extensive consultation with legal experts representing different cultural traditions, including Scandinavian law speakers who possessed detailed knowledge of Northern European legal precedents, Byzantine jurists familiar with Roman legal principles, and Slavic elders who understood the customary practices that governed local communities. The resulting legal code reflected this multicultural input, while establishing new standards that emphasized the protection of property rights, the regulation of commercial transactions, and the systematic punishment of criminal activities that threatened social stability. The earliest version of the Russkaya Pravda, known to scholars as the Short Pravda, consisted of approximately 40 articles that addressed the most common legal disputes arising in Rus society, including provisions for compensating victims of violence, regulating the ownership and transfer of property, and establishing procedures for resolving commercial disagreements. The legal framework established by these articles demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the economic relationships that sustained Rus prosperity, with detailed provisions governing the treatment of merchants, the regulation of credit arrangements, and the protection of artisans and their specialized skills. Archaeological evidence from legal proceedings conducted according to Pravda standards includes standardized weights and measures used for determining compensation payments, sealed documents that recorded legal agreements, and specialized courtroom facilities that provided appropriate settings for formal judicial proceedings. The influence of Scandinavian legal traditions remained clearly visible in the Pravda's emphasis on monetary compensation rather than physical punishment for most criminal offences, reflecting the Northern European preference for resolving disputes through negotiated settlements that restored social harmony while providing appropriate recompense for injured parties. The detailed schedules of compensation payments established for different categories of violence, from minor assaults to deliberate homicide, created predictable legal outcomes that encouraged peaceful resolution of conflicts while maintaining the social hierarchies that distinguished between free persons, dependents, and slaves. The legal protection extended to foreign merchants and craftsmen demonstrated the code's recognition of the international character of Rus commercial activities, while specific provisions governing the treatment of Byzantine and other Christian foreigners reflected the diplomatic considerations that influenced domestic legal policies. The expansion of the Russkaya Pravda during the later 11th century incorporated additional legal concepts that addressed the changing social and economic conditions resulting from the continued Christianization of Rus society and the growing complexity of urban commercial relationships. The extensive Pravda, compiled during the 1070s, included nearly 120 articles that covered topics ranging from inheritance law and marriage regulations to the management of agricultural estates and the organization of craft production. These additions reflected the influence of Byzantine legal principles that emphasized written contracts, formal procedures for property transfer, and systematic record-keeping that facilitated the resolution of complex legal disputes involving multiple parties and substantial economic interests. The legal innovations introduced through the expanded Pravda included detailed provisions governing the relationship between landowners and agricultural workers, establishing rights and obligations that balanced the economic interests of estate owners with the customary protections that Slavic peasants had traditionally enjoyed under tribal legal systems. The code's recognition of different categories of agricultural dependence, from temporary labourers to hereditary serfs, created legal frameworks that would influence Russian social development for centuries, while reflecting the economic realities of an increasingly stratified society where land ownership determined political power and social status. Archaeological evidence from rural settlements governed by Pravda regulations shows the construction of manor houses and administrative buildings that provided appropriate settings for the legal proceedings required to manage complex agricultural operations. The commercial regulations incorporated into the later versions of the Russkaya Pravda demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the international trading networks that sustained Rus prosperity, with specific provisions governing the activities of foreign merchants, the regulation of currency exchange, and the resolution of disputes involving long-distance commercial transactions. The code's detailed treatment of credit arrangements and debt collection procedures reflected the growing importance of financial relationships in Rus economic life, while provisions governing the organisation of craft guilds and the protection of specialised technical knowledge indicated recognition of the skilled labour that supported urban prosperity. The legal protections extended to merchants' property and commercial activities created stable environments for business operations while establishing the regulatory frameworks necessary for managing complex economic relationships. The judicial procedures established by the Russkaya Pravda required the development of specialized administrative institutions capable of implementing the code's provisions throughout the diverse territories under Rus control, leading to the creation of professional legal classes and standardized court systems that represented significant departures from the informal dispute resolution mechanisms that had characterized earlier periods. The appointment of trained judges with specific knowledge of legal procedures, the establishment of permanent court facilities in major cities, and the development of systematic record-keeping procedures all reflected the institutional sophistication that characterized mature Rus governmental practices. Archaeological evidence from court complexes includes specialized buildings designed for legal proceedings, archives for storing legal documents, and residential quarters for legal officials who required permanent presence in their jurisdictions. The training of legal professionals required the development of educational institutions capable of providing instruction in the complex procedures and precedents that govern Pravda implementation, leading to the establishment of schools associated with major churches and monasteries, where future judges and legal scribes could acquire the literacy and specialized knowledge necessary for their professional responsibilities. The curriculum of these legal schools included instruction in Slavic and Byzantine legal traditions, training in document preparation and record-keeping procedures, and practical experience in conducting judicial proceedings under the supervision of experienced legal practitioners. The graduation of trained legal professionals from these institutions created a class of administrators whose expertise transcended ethnic boundaries while serving the practical needs of increasingly complex governmental systems. The social impact of the Russkaya Pravda extended beyond its immediate legal applications to encompass fundamental changes in the relationships between different ethnic and social groups within Rus society, as the code's provisions created new categories of legal status that gradually replaced the tribal and clan-based identities that had previously determined individual rights and obligations. The legal recognition of social hierarchies based on wealth and occupation rather than ethnic origin facilitated the integration of diverse populations into unified social structures, while providing mechanisms for social mobility that rewarded economic success and professional competence. Archaeological evidence from urban centres governed by Pravda regulations shows the development of mixed neighbourhoods where Slavic, Scandinavian, and other ethnic groups lived in proximity, while participating in common economic and social activities. The fragmentation of centralised Varangian authority during the later 11th century resulted from the combination of succession disputes, regional economic interests, and the practical impossibility of maintaining effective control over territories that stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea using the communication and transportation technologies available to medieval rulers. The death of Yaroslav the Wise in 1054 initiated a period of territorial division among his sons that reflected both Scandinavian inheritance traditions and the practical requirements of governing diverse regions with different economic bases and political traditions. The assignment of specific cities and territories to individual princes created autonomous political units that maintained nominal allegiance to Kiev while developing independent relationships with their local populations and neighbouring powers. The principle of lateral succession established by Yaroslav's testament attempted to prevent the type of fratricidal warfare that had characterised earlier succession crises by creating systematic procedures for the rotation of princely authority among eligible family members, but the practical implementation of these arrangements proved impossible to maintain as the Rurik dynasty expanded and territorial holdings became increasingly complex. The system required princes to move between different cities as their seniority within the family hierarchy changed, creating administrative discontinuity and preventing the development of stable relationships between rulers and their subjects. Archaeological evidence from princely residences during this period shows the construction of temporary administrative facilities rather than permanent palace complexes, reflecting the mobile character of political authority under the lateral succession system. The economic factors that contributed to political fragmentation included the development of regional commercial networks that reduced dependence on the traditional north-south trade routes that had originally justified centralised control from Kiev, as local markets and specialised production centres created economic relationships that transcended traditional political boundaries. The growth of Novgorod as an independent commercial power demonstrated the potential for regional autonomy based on economic specialization, while the emergence of Galicia-Volhynia as a major political centre reflected the wealth generated by agricultural production and trade with Western European markets. Archaeological evidence from these emerging regional centres shows substantial investment in fortifications, administrative buildings, and commercial facilities that supported independent political development. The military implications of political fragmentation became apparent during the increasing frequency of interprincely conflicts that characterized the late 11th and early 12th centuries, as competing branches of the Rurik dynasty sought to expand their territorial holdings while defending against rivals who possessed equivalent claims to political legitimacy. These conflicts differed fundamentally from the earlier wars of conquest that had established Varangian dominance, involving instead complex disputes over inheritance rights, commercial privileges, and territorial boundaries that reflected the mature political relationships that had evolved within Rus society. The military techniques employed in these conflicts emphasized siege warfare and defensive operations, rather than the mobile campaigns that had characterized earlier Varangian military activities, reflecting the settled character of the populations and territories involved in these disputes. The recruitment practices employed by competing princes during these conflicts demonstrated the fundamental transformation that had occurred in the military foundations of Rus political power, as traditional Varangian warrior bands were replaced by military forces that combined professional soldiers, local militia units, and foreign mercenaries recruited from diverse sources throughout Eastern Europe. The decline in Scandinavian military recruitment forced princes to develop alternative sources of military manpower, including Turkic nomads from the southern steppes, Western European knights seeking profitable service, and Slavic warriors whose local knowledge and cultural connections provided advantages in regional conflicts. Archaeological evidence from military sites during this period shows the adoption of diverse weapons and equipment that reflected the multicultural composition of princely armies. The fortification systems developed during the period of political fragmentation represented significant advances in military engineering that reflected both the changing character of warfare and the increased resources available to regional political centres for defensive construction projects. The massive earthwork fortifications constructed around major cities during the late 11th century incorporated design principles derived from Byzantine and Western European military architecture, while adapting these techniques to local topographical conditions and available construction materials. The scale of these projects required unprecedented coordination of labour and resources that demonstrated the administrative capabilities that regional princes had developed for managing their territories, while the sophistication of the defensive works indicated access to advanced military engineering knowledge. The diplomatic relationships that developed between competing Rus principalities during this period of fragmentation created complex networks of alliances and rivalries that often transcended ethnic and cultural boundaries as princes sought to maximize their political advantages through strategic marriages, commercial agreements, and military partnerships that balanced regional interests against broader considerations of dynastic legitimacy and territorial security. The marriage alliances contracted between Rurikid princes and foreign rulers, including Hungarian kings, Polish dukes, and Byzantine imperial families, demonstrated the international recognition that Rus political entities had achieved while creating diplomatic obligations that influenced domestic political decisions. Archaeological evidence from diplomatic sites includes specialized facilities for conducting negotiations and ceremonial buildings designed for hosting foreign dignitaries according to appropriate protocols. The cultural implications of political fragmentation included the development of regional variations in artistic traditions, architectural styles, and religious practices that reflected the diverse influences and local preferences that characterized different areas of the former unified Rus state. The construction of distinctive church buildings in different principalities demonstrated the adaptation of Byzantine architectural principles to local aesthetic preferences and available construction techniques, while the development of regional schools of manuscript illumination and metalworking reflected the patronage of competing princes who sought to demonstrate their cultural sophistication and political legitimacy. Archaeological evidence from cultural sites shows the emergence of hybrid artistic styles that combined elements from multiple traditions while expressing distinctly local cultural identities. The Mongol invasions that began in 1237 encountered a politically fragmented Rus that proved incapable of coordinating effective resistance against the systematic military campaigns that Batu Khan directed against the major political centres of Eastern Europe. The Mongol military system, based on highly mobile cavalry forces supported by sophisticated siege equipment and intelligence networks, possessed decisive advantages over the defensive strategies that had evolved during the period of interprincely conflicts. The speed and coordination of Mongol operations prevented effective cooperation between Rus principalities while exploiting the political divisions that had weakened the overall military capacity of the region. Archaeological evidence from sites destroyed during the Mongol campaigns shows the devastating effectiveness of siege techniques that combined traditional nomadic mobility with advanced military technologies acquired through previous conquests in China and Central Asia. The siege of Ryazan in December 1237 demonstrated the Mongol military capabilities that would prove decisive throughout their conquest of Rus territories, as Batu Khan's forces systematically reduced the city's fortifications through coordinated attacks that overwhelmed the defenders despite their determined resistance. The destruction of Ryazan's population and the systematic demolition of its fortifications served both strategic and psychological purposes, eliminating a potential base for future resistance, while demonstrating to other Rus cities the futility of opposing Mongol demands for submission. Contemporary accounts describe the methodical efficiency with which Mongol forces conducted siege operations, employing specialized equipment and tactical procedures that reflected decades of experience in reducing fortified positions throughout their expanding empire. The fall of Moscow in January 1238 marked another crucial stage in the Mongol conquest. as the capture of this strategically located fortress eliminated a major obstacle to further advances into the heartland of Rus territories while demonstrating the inability of regional princes to coordinate effective defensive strategies. The brief siege that preceded Moscow's capture revealed the overwhelming superiority of Mongol military organisation over the improvised defensive arrangements that characterised Rus resistance efforts, while the systematic destruction that followed the city's fall served notice to other potential resistors of the consequences of continued opposition. Archaeological evidence from Mongol siege sites includes specialised military equipment and the remains of defensive works that confirm the technological advantages that enabled such rapid conquest of heavily fortified positions. The systematic destruction that followed the Mongol conquest of Kiev in 1240 marked the definitive end of Varangian political dominance in Eastern Europe, yet the cultural and institutional foundations established during 4 centuries of Scandinavian rule continued to shape the development of Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian societies long after the last Rurikid princes had submitted to Mongol authority. The survival of distinctly Rus cultural traditions throughout the period of Mongol domination demonstrated the deep roots that Varangian innovations had established within the social fabric of Eastern European populations, while the eventual emergence of new political entities claiming descent from the medieval Rus state reflected the enduring appeal of the governmental institutions and cultural identities that had evolved during the Varangian period. The contribution of Varangian political traditions to the formation of later national identities becomes most apparent in the persistent emphasis on princely authority and dynastic legitimacy that characterized the political development of Moscow, Lithuania, and other successor states that emerged from the fragmentation of Mongol rule. The Muscovite princes who gradually established dominance over the northeastern Rus territories during the 14th and 15th centuries consistently claimed descent from the Rurikid dynasty, while employing governmental institutions and ceremonial practices that directly descended from Varangian precedents. Archaeological evidence from the Moscow Kremlin includes architectural elements and decorative programs that consciously evoke the grandeur of pre-Mongol Kiev, while the legal codes promulgated by Muscovite rulers incorporated principles derived from the Russkaya Pravda, alongside newer regulations adapted to changing social and economic conditions. The persistence of Varangian influence in Ukrainian political traditions manifested through the continued importance of Kiev as a symbolic centre of legitimacy and the adoption of governmental institutions that reflected the federal character of the original Rus state. The Cossack organisations that emerged during the 16th century employed military and administrative practices that bore striking resemblances to the warrior merchant associations that had characterised early Varangian society, while their emphasis on collective decision-making and elected leadership echoed the participatory elements that had distinguished Rus political culture from the more autocratic systems that developed in Western Europe. The archaeological record from Cossack settlements includes weapons, fortifications, and residential structures that demonstrate continuity with medieval Rus material culture despite the intervening centuries of foreign domination. Belarusian cultural development similarly reflected the enduring influence of Varangian institutional innovations, particularly in the areas of legal traditions and commercial practices that had originally been introduced during the period of Rus expansion into the Western territories. The legal codes employed in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania incorporated substantial elements derived from the Russkaya Pravda, while the commercial privileges granted to merchants in Belarusian cities reflected the trading practices that had been established during the height of Varangian commercial activity. Archaeological investigations of medieval Belarusian sites have revealed material culture assemblages that demonstrate direct continuity with the hybrid Scandinavian Slavic traditions that had characterized the western regions of the Rus state. The archaeological discoveries that have revolutionized scholarly understanding of Varangian material culture began with the systematic excavations conducted at Staraya Ladoga during the mid-20th century, which revealed the sophisticated character of early Scandinavian settlements in Eastern Europe, while demonstrating the extensive commercial networks that connected these northern outposts to markets throughout the medieval world. The preservation conditions at Staraya Ladoga allowed the survival of organic materials that provided unprecedented insights into Varangian daily life, including leather goods, textiles, wooden implements, and food remains that documented the adaptation of Scandinavian cultural practices to the environmental conditions and available resources of their new territories. The excavation of Varangian burial sites throughout the former Rus territories has provided detailed information about the social hierarchies and cultural practices that characterize different periods of Scandinavian settlement, with grave goods demonstrating the evolution from purely Scandinavian cultural traditions toward the hybrid identities that emerge through interaction with local populations. The famous chamber graves discovered near Nezdovo contain assemblages that combine high-quality Scandinavian weapons and jewellery with Byzantine silk, Islamic silver, and locally produced ceramics, illustrating the cosmopolitan character of Varangian elite culture. The standardization of certain grave good categories across widely separated sites indicates the maintenance of cultural connections throughout the Varangian territories, while regional variations in burial practices demonstrate the adaptation of Scandinavian traditions to local preferences and available materials. Recent archaeological investigations employing advanced scientific techniques have revealed previously unknown aspects of Varangian commercial activities and technological capabilities, including evidence for sophisticated metalworking operations that produced both utilitarian items and luxury goods for export to distant markets. The analysis of slag deposits and workshop remains from major Varangian centres has documented the production of high-quality steel using techniques that combined Scandinavian knowledge with innovations adapted from Byzantine and Islamic sources. The discovery of standardized weights and measures, conforming to multiple international systems, demonstrates the commercial sophistication that enabled Varangian merchants to operate effectively in diverse cultural and economic environments. The investigation of Varangian fortification systems has revealed the military engineering capabilities that enabled relatively small numbers of Scandinavian warriors to establish and maintain control over vast territories populated by potentially hostile groups. The defensive works at sites like Rurikovo Gorodishche incorporate design principles derived from contemporary European military architecture, while adapting these techniques to local topographical conditions and available construction materials. The evolution of fortification designs over time reflects both the changing nature of military threats and the increasing resources available to Varangian rulers as their territories expanded and commercial activities prospered. Underwater archaeology in the Baltic and Black Sea regions has provided evidence for the sophisticated shipbuilding technologies that enabled Varangian expansion along the river systems of Eastern Europe, with vessel remains demonstrating the modifications necessary for navigating the diverse water conditions encountered during long-distance trading expeditions. The discovery of ship burials containing vessels specifically designed for river navigation has confirmed the importance of maritime technology for Varangian success, while revealing the ceremonial significance that these societies attach to their seafaring traditions. The analysis of wood samples from these vessels has provided information about forest management practices and timber trade networks that supported the construction and maintenance of large fleets. The role of Varangians in connecting Northern Europe to Byzantium, the Islamic world, and Central Asia becomes most apparent through the analysis of trade goods and monetary systems that link these diverse regions within integrated commercial networks spanning thousands of miles. The silver analysis conducted on coins found in Scandinavian hoards has revealed the complex pathways through which Islamic dirhams reached northern European markets, while the study of glass beads and other manufactured goods has documented the technological exchange that occurred along these trade routes. The Varangian commercial system created unprecedented opportunities for cultural interaction between societies that had previously maintained minimal contact, facilitating the transmission of artistic styles, technological innovations, and religious concepts across vast geographical distances. The monetary systems that developed within Varangian territories reflected the international character of their commercial activities while adapting to the practical requirements of conducting business across diverse cultural and political boundaries. The adoption of weight-based silver systems that could accommodate coins from multiple sources enabled Varangian merchants to operate effectively in markets that employed different currencies and measurement standards. Archaeological evidence for the cutting and testing of silver coins demonstrates the sophisticated evaluation techniques that ensured the reliability of commercial transactions despite the diversity of monetary systems involved in long-distance trade. The transmission of technological innovations along Varangian trade routes included not only the obvious categories of weapons and luxury goods, but also agricultural techniques, craft production methods, and architectural principles that enhanced the economic capabilities of societies throughout the network. The introduction of improved ploughing techniques and crop varieties increased agricultural productivity in regions that had previously supported only subsistence farming, while the dissemination of metalworking knowledge enabled local populations to produce higher quality tools and weapons. The archaeological record documents the gradual spread of these innovations across the territories connected by Varangian commercial activities, demonstrating the transformative impact of sustained cultural contact. The religious and intellectual exchanges facilitated by Varangian commercial networks contributed to the development of more sophisticated cultural institutions throughout northern and eastern Europe, as the interaction between different traditions stimulated innovations in art, literature, and religious practice. The transmission of Byzantine religious concepts and artistic styles through Varangian territories influenced the development of distinctive regional traditions that combined elements from multiple sources while expressing local cultural values and aesthetic preferences. The archaeological evidence for the construction of hybrid religious buildings and the production of syncretic artistic works demonstrates the creative potential that emerged from sustained cultural interaction. Modern scholarly debates about Varangian influence have evolved significantly since the 18th century controversies between Normanist and anti-Normanist historians, with contemporary research employing interdisciplinary approaches that combine archaeological evidence, linguistic analysis, genetic studies, and comparative historical investigation to develop more nuanced understandings of the complex processes involved in early medieval cultural interaction. The application of DNA analysis to human remains from Varangian period sites has provided direct evidence for the demographic composition of early Rus society, while confirming the presence of Scandinavian populations alongside indigenous groups. These studies have revealed the gradual genetic mixing that occurred over several generations, supporting historical accounts of intermarriage and cultural integration while documenting the biological foundations of the hybrid societies that emerged from a Varangian expansion. Linguistic research has contributed to scholarly understanding of Varangian influence, through detailed analysis of the loanwords and structural changes that occurred in Slavic languages during the period of Scandinavian political dominance. The identification of Old Norse administrative and military terminology within early Slavic legal documents provides evidence for the institutional innovations that Varangian rulers introduced, while the analysis of place names throughout the former Rus territories documents the geographical extent of Scandinavian settlement and influence. the survival of Scandinavian linguistic elements in modern Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian languages demonstrates the deep cultural impact of the Varangian period, despite the subsequent centuries of political and social change. The comparative study of medieval European political development has placed Varangian achievements within broader contexts that highlight both their unique characteristics and their similarities to contemporary developments in other regions. The Varangian creation of territorial states through the integration of diverse ethnic groups under unified political authority paralleled similar processes occurring in Western Europe, while their emphasis on commercial activities and urban development anticipated the economic transformations that would characterize the later medieval period. The institutional innovations developed within Varangian territories, particularly in the areas of legal codification and administrative organization, influenced political development throughout Eastern Europe while providing models for governmental practices that would persist for centuries. Recent archaeological discoveries continue to expand scholarly understanding of Varangian material culture and its relationship to broader patterns of medieval European development, with new excavations revealing previously unknown aspects of Scandinavian settlement patterns, economic activities, and cultural practices. The investigation of rural settlements has provided insights into the agricultural foundations that supported Varangian urban centres, while the analysis of craft production sites has documented the technological capabilities that enabled the manufacture of goods for both local consumption and long-distance trade. These discoveries have confirmed the sophisticated character of Varangian society, while revealing the extent to which Scandinavian settlers adapted their traditional practices to the environmental and cultural conditions they encountered in Eastern Europe. The ongoing significance of Varangian historical legacy extends beyond academic historical research to encompass contemporary political and cultural debates about national identity, historical continuity, and the relationships between different ethnic and cultural groups within modern Eastern European societies. The Rurik dynasty's role as the founding political institution of the medieval Rus state continues to influence discussions about the historical foundations of Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian national identities, while archaeological evidence for Varangian cultural achievements provides material for contemporary cultural expressions that seek to connect modern populations with their medieval ancestors. The preservation and interpretation of Varangian archaeological sites has become an important aspect of cultural heritage management in the regions that were formerly part of the Rus state, with museums and historical parks providing public access to the material remains of this crucial period in Eastern European development. The reconstruction of Varangian settlements and the display of archaeological artifacts enable contemporary audiences to appreciate the sophistication of medieval Scandinavian culture, while understanding the complex processes of cultural interaction that shaped the development of modern Eastern European societies. The scholarly consensus that has emerged from decades of interdisciplinary research recognizes the Varangian period as a crucial formative stage in Eastern European development, during which the interaction between Scandinavian, Slavic, and other cultural traditions created the institutional foundations and cultural identities that would influence the region's subsequent historical trajectory. The Varangian achievement in creating stable political institutions capable of governing diverse populations across vast territories established precedents for state building that would be emulated by later rulers, while their commercial innovations created economic networks that connected Eastern Europe to the broader medieval world system. The transformation of Varangian warrior merchants into the founders of lasting political dynasties and cultural traditions represents one of medieval Europe's most remarkable examples of successful cultural adaptation and institutional innovation. Their legacy survived the political catastrophes that destroyed their immediate governmental structures, persisting through centuries of foreign domination to influence the eventual emergence of modern Eastern European nations. The Varangian contribution to world history extends beyond their immediate political and military achievements, to encompass their role in facilitating the cultural exchanges that enriched medieval European civilization, while establishing the foundations for the distinctive political and cultural traditions that continue to characterize the societies they helped create. The enduring significance of their historical legacy demonstrates the transformative potential of sustained cultural interaction and the lasting impact that relatively small groups of determined individuals can achieve when they successfully adapt their traditions to new environments while remaining open to learning from the societies they encounter.